Foreword of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Maria Therese. Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Rev. Gerald T. Brennan. Foreword. Sermons for children. Why not? After all, children form a very important part of every congregation. They have souls, and their souls must be saved. Children must be taught, they must be instructed, they must learn to know, love, and serve God. Guiding little children along Christ's way is one of the greatest works of the priesthood. It requires zeal, patience, understanding. But the zealous priest will find that this part of his ministry will bring to him great satisfaction and delight. For many years it has been my privilege every Sunday morning to give a short talk at the children's Mass. In these talks I have tried to tell a story that would appeal to children, and then from the story draw a short practical lesson. I have tried to present the exalted truths of our religion in a simple, concrete way, in a way that would appeal to children, in a way that children would understand. Many of these sermons have already appeared in print under the titles Angel Food and For Heaven's Sake. The reception accorded these 2 volumes of the Angel Food series has encouraged me to add a third. It's yours for use. GTB. End of foreword. Chapter 1 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Rev. Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 1. The First Visit. Do you remember the first time you came into church? That was long ago, wasn't it? Well, it's always a big day the first time a boy or girl comes into a church. There are so many things to see: the altar, the candles, the lights, the statues of the saints, the pictures on the walls, the beautiful windows. Now, I'm going to tell you about little Jo-Ann Murphy and what happened the first time she went to church. Jo-Ann was 5 years old, and she had never been in a church. Jo-Ann had seen a picture of a church in her storybook, and her mother had told her that Jesus lives in the church. But that wasn't enough. Time and time again, Jo-Ann had begged her mother to take her to church. But the mother felt that the girl was too small. The mother was afraid that Jo-Ann might get tired, and she might disturb the people. Well, one summer evening, after much teasing, Mrs. Murphy decided that she would take Jo-Ann to church. As they walked down Thomas Street, the mother told the little girl that they were going to God's house. She told the little girl, too, that nobody ever talks in church, and that she would have to be good. Little Jo-Ann promised that she wouldn't speak a word, and that she'd try to be very good. Now, little Jo-Ann kept her promise. She liked God's house, because it was so big and there were so many things to see. The little girl wanted to tell her mother that she liked the church, but she was afraid. Hadn't her mother told her that it was wrong to speak in God's house? Everything went fine until it was time for benediction. All the people knelt down to pray. Mrs. Murphy helped the little girl off the bench, and Jo-Ann knelt down beside her mother. But Jo-Ann didn't like to kneel. She was so small that when she knelt down she couldn't see anything. However, she didn't speak, and she tried to be good. Jo-Ann listened to the music, and she heard the people sing. Now and then the little girl watched her mother, and she always found her mother looking straight ahead. After a while the mother felt a tug on her dress. She knew that the little girl was pulling her dress, but she paid no attention. She kept looking straight ahead. Then Jo-Ann stood up. She raised her head and whispered, "Mama, what are you looking at?" Mrs. Murphy didn't answer. She pretended that she didn't hear, and kept looking straight ahead. "Mama," whispered the little girl again, "please tell me. What are you looking at?" The mother knew that she would have to answer. She turned toward the little girl and spoke softly. "Jo-Ann, I'm looking at Jesus." "You're looking at Jesus?" spoke the little girl. "Lift me up, Mamma, lift me up. I want to see Jesus too." Now, I don't think that I have to tell you the rest of the story. Yes, the mother lifted the little girl high so that she could see the altar. There were so many things to see that I don't know whether the little girl saw Jesus or not. But I do know that Jesus saw Joanne, and he was very happy. He smiled, too, when he saw the little girl who wanted to be lifted up to see Jesus. You, too, children, want to see Jesus. You not only want to see Jesus, but you want to be with Him. You want to live with Jesus up in heaven. Isn't that right? Certainly. That's why you say your prayers every day. That's why you come to Mass. That's why you receive Holy Communion so often. Why do you obey your parents? Why do you tell the truth? Why are you honest? You do these things because you want to save your soul. In other words, you want to be lifted up so that you can see Jesus, so that you can be with Jesus, so that you can live with Him in heaven. Why did God make you? God made you because He loves you, and there's only one thing that God asks you to do. God asks you to show Him that you love Him. You show God that you love Him by saving your soul. You know, you have only one chance to save your soul, and you have that chance now. If you learn about God, if you love Him, if you keep God's laws, you'll save your soul. Remember, God made you to know Him, to love Him, to serve Him in this life, and to be happy with Him forever in heaven. Little Joanne wanted to be lifted up so that she could see Jesus. If you save your soul, you too will be lifted up. Then you'll not only see Jesus, but, best of all, you'll live with Jesus forever in heaven. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 2 The Wise Servant. Today I want to tell you a story about an old colored servant. His name was Jackson. Well, Jackson had worked in the same house for over 30 years. He helped with the cleaning, waited on table, and cared for the lawn and flowers. While Jackson was a servant, still the old negro felt that he was very important. He felt that he was really a member of the family. Jackson was very kind to everybody, and everyone in the family was kind to him. The master of the house was especially fond of Jackson, and the old servant thought a great deal of his master. It seems that one day the master of the house became very ill. For a whole week everyone in the house talked in whispers, and during all that time Jackson was not allowed to see his master. Day by day the master became weaker and weaker. Then, one day, Jackson heard the members of the family crying. The faithful old negro stood outside his master's door and prayed hard. He wanted his master to get better. Soon the door opened and a doctor came out of the room. "How is my master?" asked Jackson, and there were tears in his eyes. "Jackson," said the doctor, "your master has just died. He has gone on a long journey. Your master has gone to heaven." Jackson raised his arms and shook his head. "Oh, doctor," he said, "I's sorry that my master has gone, but I's afraid that my master has not gone to heaven." "But why, Jackson?" asked the doctor. "What makes you think that your master has not gone to heaven?" "Oh, I knows my master," said the old negro. "When my master go on a journey, he talk about it a long time, and he spends lots of time getting ready. I's never heard my master talk about heaven, and I's never seen my master get ready for heaven either." Jackson was certainly a wise old servant. You know, children, a person who wants to go to heaven not only talks about heaven, but he gets ready for heaven. You can't wish your way into heaven. Oh, no! You must prepare. You must get ready for heaven. Let's suppose that you are going to visit your aunt in Chicago. What do? First, you write a letter to your aunt and tell her that you are going to visit her. Then you go over to the station and find out what time the train will leave for Chicago. You ask your father for some money, and you buy your train ticket for Chicago. Each day you get something ready for the trip. Your mother washes and irons your clothes. You pack your clean clothes in a bag. For several days you talk about nothing except your trip to Chicago. So many things have to be done before you take your trip. That's what we call getting ready for the trip. Now, children, someday you are going to take a long trip. You are going to take a trip to heaven to see God. But you have to get ready for that trip. There are lots of things that you have to do before you take that trip. Yes, you have to get ready for your trip to heaven. You can't buy a ticket for heaven either. You have to work for your ticket to heaven. God gives some people a long time to get ready for heaven. Other people have only a short time. Every day that you live on this earth must be spent getting ready for heaven. How do you get ready? Well, I'll tell you just what you have to do. You must say your prayers, go to Mass, go to confession, and receive Holy Communion often. You must be honest, speak the truth, obey your parents. In a word, you must keep God's laws. By doing these things, children, you get your soul ready for heaven. You don't know just when God will want you to take your trip to heaven. Wouldn't it be terrible if you were not ready when God calls you? Get ready every day for your trip to heaven. Get ready for heaven now. End of chapter 2. Chapter 3 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 3 The Voice in the Dark. I suppose you would like to hear another story this morning. Well, I'm not going to disappoint you. Today I have a story about a priest, a very holy priest by the name of Father Francis. Father Francis lived many years ago in the big city of Chicago. He had been a priest for more than 40 years. During those years, Father Francis did his best to help people be good. But now he was an old man. Even though he had worked hard, still he felt that there was too much sin in the world. So the priest worried a great deal. He worried about the world, the bad people in the world, the many sins that were being made every day. He felt, too, that the devil had too many friends. These things bothered the old priest, and that's why he prayed so hard. Well, one night Father Francis said his prayers and went to bed. But the old priest couldn't sleep. How could he sleep when he thought about all the sin and the evil in the world? The more Father Francis thought about sin and the evil, the more he worried. He turned and tossed until long after midnight. He just couldn't get to sleep. As the priest lay there thinking, something very strange happened. All of a sudden he heard a voice. It was the voice of Almighty God, and the voice spoke to Father Francis. "Why don't you go to sleep?" asked the voice. "Oh, I can't go to sleep," answered the priest. "I'm worried about this world and the way things are going." Now," said the voice, "you're worrying too much. Just leave everything to me. I'll take care of the world. You go to sleep, and I'll sit up the rest of the night." Father Francis couldn't help but smile. God was closer than the old man thought. God was still on the job, looking after the world, and God knew everything. Boys and girls, there's one thing that Father Francis forgot, and very often we forget the same thing. God is not dead. God isn't even asleep. God is always awake. No matter what happens, God is always on the job. Yes, God is always on the job, running this world, watching over everything, taking care of everybody. God sees everything, and He knows everything. He sees every boy, every girl, every man, every woman. God knows where you live. He knows your name, your age, where you go to school, where you go to church. He knows all your secrets, and you can't hide anything from Him. God hears every word you speak, sees everything you do. Yes, God knows everything. So don't ever feel that God is far away. God is very close to you. God is near you always. Oh, I know that some days things go wrong. But when things do go wrong, don't get the idea that God has gone back on you. Remember, God is running this world, and He does things in the way that He knows to be the best way. So just leave everything to Him. God has been running this world for thousands of years. He knows His business, and He never makes a mistake. Do you know, children, that I thought a lot about God last night? Yes, I did. I was reading the newspaper when, suddenly, something went wrong with the electric power. Every light in my house went out. The street lights went out, and the whole city was in darkness. Well, do you know what I did? I looked out the window. Why, it was so dark outside that I couldn't see across the street. But then I happened to look up at the sky. And what do you think? There were hundreds of stars shining brightly in the sky. Things were mighty dark down on the earth, but everything was bright up in heaven. God's lights were shining brightly through the darkness. Yes, children, at times things may look mighty dark and black to you. Things may go wrong with you. You may be disappointed. You may be sick. You may find it hard to learn. You may worry and even be afraid. But just remember, God's light always shines through the darkness. God is always on the job. He takes care of everything, and He brings everything out all right. When you say your prayers tonight, tell God that you know that He is very near. Tell God that you believe in Him. Tell Him that you hope in Him. Tell Him that you love Him. Ask God to watch over you every minute of the day and night. I'll show you just how to do it. Kneel down, children, and I'll tell you just what you should say. Now say these words after me. Oh God, I believe in You. I hope in You. I love You. I know that You are very near. Watch over me, protect me, keep me from harm. That was fine, children. I am sure that God was listening. End of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 4 Nuggins. I have a blind friend who lives in the city of Detroit. This man, children, has been blind ever since he was born. Do you know that my friend has never seen his own mother? He has never seen a rainbow. He has never seen the sunset, the stars, the moon, the green grass, the falling snow. My friend has never seen any of these things. He has never seen a child smile. He has never seen a tear. For 33 years my friend has lived in darkness. For him every day has been one long black night. You may think that just because my friend is blind, he has to spend all of his time at home. That isn't true. Every day my friend leaves the house and goes for a walk in the park. He goes to the store, visits his friends. Yes, he even goes uptown. How does my friend do these things? Well, my friend has a dog, a very smart dog by the name of Nuggins. I think you'd like to hear about Nuggins. Nuggins is a German Shepherd dog. He's what they call a seeing eye dog, a dog who has been trained to lead and guide blind people. When Nuggins was very young, he was sent to school. Oh, I don't mean that he was sent to a school like yours. Nuggins went to a dog school. For 3 months Nuggins was taught to obey. He was taught to sit, lie down, stand up when he was ordered. He was taught to come when he was called. When the teacher said forward, the dog was taught to go ahead. At the word stop, the dog was taught to stand still. He was taught to carry shoes, newspapers, pipes, hats, and many other things. Every day for 3 months the dog was made to do the same thing over and over again. Well, after the dog had spent 3 months at the dog school, my friend bought Nuggin for $150. That may seem to be a lot of money to pay for a dog, but the dog has been worth every penny of it. Nuggins takes my friend everywhere, leads him through crowds, crosses busy streets, guides him upstairs, and never once has the dog led my friend into danger. How does this dog do all these things? Listen! Nuggins wears a harness. There is a handle on the harness, and my friend holds tightly to the handle. Nuggins always walks to the left side of my friend, just a little ahead of him. When my friend says forward, the dog begins to walk, and pulls my friend after him. If the dog stops, then my friend knows that he has come to a step. If the dog pulls back, that's a sign of danger. If the dog sees a hole, he pulls to the left and draws his master away from the hole. In crossing a street, the dog will stop, look both ways, and when he is sure that nothing is coming, he will cross. Yes, he'll even hurry to get his master out of the path of autos. All that my friend has to do is to hold tightly to the handle on the dog's harness. The dog does the seeing and leads the master. Nuggins is always at my friend's side, leading and guiding him safely, warning him when there is danger. I suppose you are wondering why I told you about Nuggins this morning. Well, I had a reason, a very good reason. Do you know that you too have a guide who always walks right by your side? Yes, children, your guide is your guardian angel. Your angel leads you, warns you about sin, guides you safely through life. God loves you, children, and He wants you to save your soul. That's why God is giving you this guide. Your angel looks after you and nobody else. Whenever you are in danger, when you're tempted to steal, lie, disobey, or break any of God's laws, it's your guardian angel who nudges you and warns you. That's your angel's signal to be careful. My blind friend never gets into trouble because he follows his guide, Nuggins. If you follow your guardian angel and listen to him when he warns you, you won't get into trouble. You won't fall into sin. Some boys and girls, even though they can see, are blind to certain things. They don't see that certain things will lead them into sin. There are persons, places, and things that will lead them into sin, and these boys and girls don't see them. Yes, they are blind to sin. Time and time again they walk right into sin with their eyes wide open. Why do they do this? Because they don't listen to their guardian angel. Oh, I wish that each of you would look upon your guardian angel as your very best friend, a guide sent by God to help you save your soul. Your angel is working for you 24 hours of each day. His big job is to keep you away from the devil and sin. So, the next time you're tempted to do wrong, listen to your angel and do what he tells you. If you do that, you won't be sorry. My blind friend depends upon Nuggins to keep him out of danger. You should depend upon your guardian angel in the same way. Remember, your angel is your guide, your seeing eye. He sees and knows what is best for you. Children, if you follow your guardian angel, you won't go wrong, because your angel will lead you in the right direction. Some day I hope your guardian angel will lead you to the feet of God. That's what you want. Isn't that true? End of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 5. A Lion is After Me. Some time ago I read a story in the paper that made me laugh. It all happened in the city of Denver. Now, it's usually very quiet near the city park in Denver, but on the day of our story there was plenty of excitement. What happened? Well, something happened to 15-year-old Frankie Sullivan, something that gave Frankie a terrible scare. It seems that Frankie went for a bicycle ride in the city park. It was a fine summer day, just the right kind of a day for a ride through the park. The boy stopped for some time to watch a ball game, and then, after he rested, he decided to go home. As he was riding along the path near the gates of the park, Frankie thought he heard a strange noise behind him. The boy kept right on riding, and he turned his head. And was he surprised! What do you think? There, coming down the path after Frankie, was a lion, a real live lion. Frankie was scared. A lion, a real live lion was coming after him. What could he do? Well, there was only one thing that Frankie could do, and he did it. He pedaled his bicycle as fast as he could. Oh, if he could only get to the corner drugstore! Oh, if somebody would only help him! 1,000 terrible thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. He didn't dare look behind him. He wondered whether the lion was still coming. Was the lion very close to him? Frankie didn't know it, but the lion was coming right after him. Frankie didn't take any chances. He hurried as fast as he could. He passed through the gates and reached the drugstore. He jumped off his bike, ran into the store, slammed the door behind him, and shouted at the top of his voice, "Help! A lion is after me! A lion is after me!" At first, the man in the drugstore didn't believe Frankie. "A lion is after you?" he said in surprise. "What do you mean? There are no lions around here. A lion in the city of Denver?" "Yes, yes!" called out Frankie as he pointed to the window. "There's a lion out there, and that lion is after me." The old man hurried to the window, and sure enough there was the lion, pawing Frankie's bicycle. A lion right in front of the man's drugstore. Well, it didn't take very long for that man to call the police. He called the firemen, too. And did they come? You bet they came, and they came in a hurry. They came with guns, rope, tear gas, and fire hose. And sure enough, they found the lion in front of the drugstore. One of the firemen made a lasso and threw the rope around the lion's neck. The rest was easy. The lion was caught and was taken back to his cage in the zoo from which he had escaped. And after the excitement was over, a 15-year-old boy said a prayer of thanks. That boy was Frankie Sullivan. Children, that was a true story. It really happened. A lion did chase Frankie Sullivan. And what would you say if I told you that a lion is chasing you? Yes, a real lion is after you. Now, don't look surprised. The lion I'm talking about is not a lion from a zoo. The lion that is after you is a lion from hell, the devil. When I read that story about Frankie Sullivan, I thought about what St. Peter once said. St. Peter said that the devil is a roaring lion that goes around looking for people whom he may devour. He's a lion that chases people and tries to kill their souls. He's always after someone, trying to make someone fall into sin. Yes, the lion from hell, the devil, is after you, trying to make you fall into sin. You don't want the devil to catch you. No, sir. Well, then, be on your guard. When you get up in the morning, just say to yourself, "A lion is after me." When the devil tempts you during the day, remember that the lion is very close to you. If you fall into venial sin, the lion has his paw on you. If you fall into mortal sin, then the lion has got you. Don't let that happen. Children, the devil is not your friend. He's a lion. Keep away from him. Run away from him whenever he gets near you. Don't let that lion catch you. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 6. The Princess and the 3 Boxes. Many years ago there lived a very beautiful princess. This princess lived in a castle, and she had everything to make her happy: servants, rich clothes, fine horses, and plenty of money. Now, many men wanted to marry the princess. They wanted the princess's money. But the princess was very wise. Of course, the princess wanted to marry, but she wanted to marry someone who really loved her. She didn't want anyone to marry her just for her money. How could the princess find out which man really loved her? Which man spoke the truth? It was hard to tell. Well, one day the princess decided to follow a strange plan. What do you think the princess did? The princess placed 3 boxes in a room of the castle. One box was made of gold, the second box was made of silver, the third box was made of iron. "Now," said the princess to herself, "whenever a man asks me to marry him, that man shall choose one of these boxes. There will be 2 small rings in one of these boxes, and each time the rings will be in a different box. I shall marry the man who chooses the box which holds the rings." Well, in a short time a soldier called on the princess. The soldier had seen a picture of the princess, and he had fallen in love with the picture. The soldier wanted to marry the princess, but the princess was afraid to marry the soldier because the soldier was a stranger. However, the princess decided to give the soldier a chance. She led the soldier into a room and showed him the 3 boxes, one of gold, one of silver, one of iron. "Choose one of these boxes," said the princess. "If you choose the box which holds 2 rings, then I shall marry you." The soldier looked at the 3 boxes, one of gold, one of silver, one of iron. They were all the same size. Which box should he choose? The soldier waited for some minutes. Finally the soldier raised his hand and pointed to one of the boxes. Which box did the soldier choose? The soldier chose the silver box. Then the soldier walked over to the silver box and lifted the cover. The silver box was empty. The soldier thanked the princess and said, "Goodbye." The soldier did not marry the princess. The next man who came to the castle was a proud and greedy king. A king who had lots of money, but a king who wanted more money. This king was a good pretender. The king pretended that he loved the princess, and he told many lies. Finally, the king asked the princess to marry him. Before the princess would agree to marry the king, she invited the king into the room and showed him the 3 boxes, the gold box, the silver box, and the iron box. "You shall have one chance," said the princess to the king. "Choose one of these boxes. If you choose the box which holds 2 rings, then I shall marry you." I said that the king was greedy. Yes, he was greedy. The king looked at the iron box and shook his head. The king looked at the silver box and turned away. "I'll take the gold box," said the king as he smiled, because he knew that the princess would keep her rings in the best box. Then the king opened the gold box. The gold box was empty. The king flew into a rage. He cried out in anger, while the princess smiled. The proud and greedy king did not marry the beautiful princess. Then a young prince came to the castle. This prince really loved the princess, and the princess loved the young prince. In fact, the princess hoped that the young prince would ask her to marry him. Well, the young prince did ask the princess to marry him. Like all the others, the young prince was shown the 3 boxes and told to choose the box which held the 2 rings. The young prince looked at the gold box. He looked at the silver box. He looked at the iron box. Which box should the young prince choose? It was all over in a minute. The young prince chose the iron box. "Have I lost?" asked the young prince in a nervous voice. The princess didn't answer. She motioned to the young prince to open the iron box. Slowly the young prince lifted the cover of the iron box. The iron box was... No, no, the iron box was not empty, and the iron box were the 2 rings. Yes, children, the young prince married the beautiful princess. For many years they lived happily in the castle of the princess. And during all those years each wore a ring on a finger of the left hand. They were the rings found by the young prince in the iron box. Now, boys and girls, which box would you have picked? I'm afraid that some of you would have picked the silver box. Most of you would have picked the gold box. Why? Because gold and silver shine. Gold and silver look nice to you. Like the soldier and the king, you would have been tempted by the looks of the box. Do you know how the devil works when he tempts you to sin? He fools you by the looks of things. The devil tells you to read a certain book, and he shows you the fine cover of the book. But the book with the fine cover may be a bad book. The book may teach you bad things. The devil tells you to go to a beautiful theater, but the movie in that theater may make you think about bad things, or that movie may teach you to do bad things. Again, the devil tells you to play with a certain boy or girl, because the boy or girl dresses well and lives in a fine home. Remember, clothes or a fine house don't make a person good. You know, the devil is always trying to make sin look good to you. He tries to tell you that sin is not bad. But you know better. Every sin, even a venial sin, is bad. You know what the devil did to Adam and Eve. Why, the devil told Adam and Eve that, if they would eat the fruit, they would become like God. It was a lie, but Adam and Eve listened. Look what happened. Adam and Eve lost everything. You too will lose God's grace in your soul if you listen to the devil. Remember, the devil is always tempting you. The devil is always telling you to pick the gold box or the silver box. He tells you that sin is fine and that sin will bring you lots of fun. But don't be fooled. Don't listen to the devil. Don't talk to him. Don't give the devil any of your time. The devil is not your friend, no matter what he promises you. Watch out for these temptations, children. Be on your guard. Sin is always bad, no matter how the devil makes it look. Fight every temptation by saying your prayers. Fight the devil every time you meet him. And don't be fooled by the looks of things. End of chapter 6. Chapter 7 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Figs by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 7. The Boy Who Slept on a Windy Night. I think that you are going to like my story this morning. It all happened in a little town in the West, where most of the people were farmers. Once a year the farmers had a holiday. On that day nobody worked. A small circus would come to town. There would be music, dancing, a merry-go-round, and many other things to make the people happy. On that day, too, the farmers would hire young men and women to work on the farms. You can easily see that the holiday was a day for fun, and it was also a day when young people could get a job. Now, Farmer White needed a young man to work on his farm. So, on the holiday, Farmer White went to the village. He felt that, in the village, he would find someone who would work on his farm. Of course, Farmer White went to the circus. He saw the elephants, dancing bears, acrobats, and all the other wonderful things one sees at a circus. When the circus was over, Farmer White walked through the crowd, looking for someone who would work on his farm. Just outside of the Punch and Judy show, Farmer White saw a boy about 17 years of age. He was a tall, thin fellow, a young man who didn't seem to be very strong. "Well, young fellow," said Farmer White, "what's your name?" "My name is Fred, sir." "Well, I'm looking for someone who will work on my farm," said Farmer White. "Do you know anything about farming?" "Yes, I do," answered the young man. "I know how to sleep on a windy night." "You what?" asked Farmer White in surprise. "I know how to sleep on a windy night." Farmer White shook his head and walked away. He spoke to several other young men, but they all had jobs. Farmer White couldn't find anyone who would help him with the work on his farm. Late in the afternoon Farmer White met Fred again. And again Farmer White asked Fred whether he knew anything about farming. For a second time Fred gave the same answer. "I know how to sleep on a windy night." Farmer White wanted someone who could work. He didn't care whether the young man could sleep on a windy night. So once again the farmer tried to find someone whom he could hire. But Farmer White found no one. All the young men had jobs. Finally Farmer White went back to our friend Fred. "Fred," said the farmer, "I must have someone to help me with the work on the farm. Just how much do you know about farming?" "Well," answered Fred, "as I told you before, I know how to sleep on a windy night." Farmer White was disgusted, but he had to have someone who would help on the farm, so he decided to take a chance. "All right, young man," said Farmer White, "come along to the farm. We'll see what you can do." Fred worked on the farm for several weeks. Farmer White was too busy to pay much attention to what the young fellow was doing. Then one night the wind woke up. The wind howled through the trees. It roared down the chimneys, shook the windows, and made such a terrible noise that it awoke Farmer White. Farmer White sat up in bed. The wind! Farmer White knew what the wind had done in the past. It might tear off the barn doors and scatter the hay. It might scare the pigs and chickens. The horses, too, might be afraid. That was enough. Farmer White jumped out of bed and shouted to Fred, who was sleeping in the attic. "Fred, come down and help me before the wind destroys everything." But Fred didn't answer. "Fred! Fred!" shouted the farmer again. But there was no answer. Then Farmer White ran up the stairs to the attic. He shook Fred and tried to awaken him. "Get up, Fred, get up! The wind will destroy everything." But Fred never moved. He kept right on sleeping. Farmer White had no time to lose. He hurried down the stairs, ran across the yard, and reached the barn. And was Farmer White surprised? The barn doors were fastened tightly, and the windows were locked. The hay was tied so that it couldn't blow away. The horses were safe, and the pigs and chickens were quiet. Outside the wind was blowing hard. Inside the barn the animals were quiet and everything was safe. Then, all of a sudden, Farmer White laughed out loud. Farmer White knew what Fred had meant when he said that he knew how to sleep on a windy night. Do you know why Fred was able to sleep on a windy night? Well, the answer is easy. Fred did his work well every day. He fastened the windows, took care of the animals, and locked the barn doors every night. Every day Fred was getting ready for the windy night. Then, when the wind did wake up, Fred didn't have to worry, because he had done his work well. Boys and girls, there's a fine lesson for you in this story. You can't tell just when a temptation will blow your way. A temptation to steal, to be dishonest, to miss Mass, to lie, a temptation to disobey. So, you have to get ready before the temptation comes. You have to get ready every day. How do you do that? You get ready for temptation by prayer. Yes, you have to pray every morning, during the day, and every night. Prayer brings God close to your side. Then, when the temptation comes, God will be right there to help you. God will help you so that you won't fall into sin, so that the temptation won't lick you. Remember, a temptation, like a storm, comes when you least expect it. Get ready for the temptation now by prayer every day. Then, when the temptation comes, you'll be safe. You'll be just like the boy in the story, the boy who slept on a windy night. End of chapter 7. Chapter 8 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 8. A Queen Learns a Lesson. Many years ago there lived a very beautiful queen. People used to say that she was the most beautiful queen in the world. That may have been true, but the sad part of our story is that this queen knew she was beautiful, and that made her proud and very vain. Every day she used to spend a good part of her time standing before a mirror, admiring herself and praising her beauty. Now, the queen's husband, the king, was a very good and holy man. He knew that his wife was vain. Time and time again he spoke to his wife and tried to correct her, but the queen only laughed and went on in her sinful way. The king tried to be patient, but one day the king became very angry. "Don't you know," he said to his wife, "that some day you will die? Then God will punish you for being so vain. God will send you to suffer forever in hell." You may think it strange, but even those words of the king didn't frighten the proud queen. "I'm not afraid to die," she answered, "because death is the end of everything. How can a person die and then begin to live again?" Those terrible words hurt the king. He knew that his wife was wrong. He knew that the queen needed to learn a lesson. But how could he teach her a lesson? For several days the king thought and thought. Finally he decided to follow an unusual plan. It was the queen's birthday. Of course, the queen's friends gave her many fine presents. Presents that cost lots of money. Presents that made her very happy. But there was no present from the king. All through the day the queen wondered whether she would receive a present from the king. Had the king forgotten the queen's birthday? No, children, the king didn't forget the queen's birthday. That night the king gave the queen a very beautiful ring. A ring with sparkling diamonds and precious stones. But that wasn't all. The queen received another present from the king, a large box tied with a beautiful ribbon. What was in that box? Well, there was a strange present in that box. Listen. The queen untied the beautiful ribbon, removed the paper, and took the cover from the box. And was she surprised? There in the box was a glass bowl. At first the queen thought that the bowl was empty. But the bowl wasn't empty. In the bottom of a bowl lay a brown and yellow caterpillar. "What does this mean?" asked the queen angrily. The king smiled. "Now, don't be angry," he said. "I want you to place the glass bowl upon your desk. Look at the caterpillar now and then and see what happens." Of course the queen was curious. She agreed to place the glass bowl containing the caterpillar upon her desk. She wondered what would happen. What did happen? Well, the first day the brown and yellow caterpillar moved around in the bottom of the bowl. The second day the caterpillar moved some more. But after a few days the caterpillar didn't move. The queen thought that the caterpillar was asleep. Several days, in fact, several weeks passed by, and during all that time never once did a caterpillar move. "Why, that caterpillar is dead," said the queen to her husband, and the king nodded his head as though he understood. "Keep watching that bowl," said the king with a smile, "and see what happens." Well, for several weeks the queen watched the brown and yellow caterpillar in the bottom of the bowl. Nothing happened. But then, one sunny afternoon, the queen thought that she saw the caterpillar move. Yes, the caterpillar did move. It began to crawl. And what do you think? The next morning, when the queen looked at her glass bowl, there was no caterpillar. In the bottom of the bowl was a butterfly, a beautiful butterfly with yellow wings that looked like gold. "Now," said the king to his wife, "I have proved to you that you were wrong. Death is not the end of everything. You saw the caterpillar go to sleep. Death is nothing more than going to sleep. And you saw that caterpillar wake up and begin to live again as a beautiful butterfly. Some day your body will die. You, too, will go to sleep. But your soul will never die. After death your soul will wake up in another world where it will live forever." Yes, the queen had learned a lesson. I hope, children, that you, too, have learned that same lesson. Some day you will die. Yes, your body will go to sleep. But your soul will never die. Once God makes a soul, He never destroys it. Your soul will live forever. After death, your soul will live in a new world. It will begin a new life. Your soul will either suffer forever, or your soul will be happy forever with God. Remember, children, death is not the end of everything. Death is the beginning of a new life for the soul. Take good care of your soul now. Then, after death, God will take care of your soul, and you'll be forever happy. End of chapter 8. Chapter 9 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 9. The Elephant and the Ants. Many years ago there lived an elephant in Africa by the name of Trunky. He was a tall elephant, a proud elephant, and a very, very mean elephant. In fact, Trunky was so mean that all the other animals in the jungle were afraid of him. Yes, even the lions and tigers were afraid of Trunky, and whenever they would see the elephant they would run away and hide. Everyone was afraid of Trunky the elephant. Now, Trunky was always very mean to the poor little ants who lived in the jungle. Trunky would step on the ants and kill them. He even tramped on their houses and knocked them down. Every day hundreds of ants were killed by the mean old Trunky. Finally, some of the ants decided that they would speak to the elephant and beg him to be kind. So about 50 little ants went to the elephant's house. Now, the elephant lived in a large house made of great trees, and the house stood right in the middle of the jungle. Of course, when the poor little ants saw the mighty elephant, they were so afraid that they could hardly talk. "Please be kind to us," begged the tiny ants. "All that we want is a chance to live." "What right have you to live?" growled the mean old elephant. "You're good for nothing, anyway. Why, you're so small that I can hardly see you." Those words hurt the little ants. They tried not to show their feelings, and once again they begged the elephant to be kind. But the proud old elephant wouldn't listen. "Get out of my house!" he roared, as he waved his trunk high in the air. "Get out of my house and don't come back." That was enough. The 50 little ants hurried away. "We'll be back and we'll fix you," cried one brave ant as he left the house. "They'll fix me," laughed the elephant to himself. "Can you imagine that? Tiny ants can't harm a mighty elephant like me. They make me laugh." And the elephant did laugh. He laughed at the tiny ants because he felt they could do him no harm. Several months passed by, and the elephant forgot all about the tiny ants. Then, one night, what do you think happened? The elephant was sound asleep in his great house. Suddenly the house began to shake. Then there was a terrible noise, a crash. The great wooden house, roof and all, crashed to the ground, and the mean old elephant was buried under the mighty trees. Trunky moaned and groaned and suffered, but there was no one to help him, and finally Trunky, the mean old elephant, died. Now, what made the elephant's house fall and crush him to death? Just this. When Trunky refused to be kind, the tiny ants called together all their friends. And what do you think the ants did? Every night hundreds and hundreds of little ants dug tiny holes in the wood of the great house of the mean old elephant. Of course, at first the holes were very small and could hardly be seen. But each night the holes became larger. For months and months the tiny ants worked away, making their holes larger and larger. Those holes made the house weak. Finally the house fell. The tiny ants, by digging their little holes, destroyed the big house and the mighty elephant. Boys and girls, no matter how strong and powerful you may think you are, there are small things that can destroy you. Venial sins, you know, are small sins. Yet venial sins can help to destroy your soul. The little holes made by the ants didn't amount to very much at first, but after a while those little holes became big holes and they did lots of damage. You may think that venial sins don't hurt your soul, but they do. Little by little venial sins lead you into mortal sin. Venial sins make mortal sin easy. The man who robs a bank doesn't start his bad life by robbing banks. Oh no, he starts by stealing little things. If he doesn't get caught stealing little things, then he starts to steal big things. If he doesn't get caught stealing big things, he gets very bold and starts to rob banks. The little sins lead him to the big sins. And it's the same way with you. If you make little sins, venial sins, and don't try to stop making them, some day the venial sins will lead you into mortal sin. Be careful, children, and try not to make the smallest venial sin. If you learn to hate venial sin and keep away from venial sin, you'll never have to worry about making a mortal sin. I know that you're going to try. End of chapter 9. Chapter 10 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 10. The Three-Legged Mouse. Once upon a time some mice held a meeting in the cellar. Didn't you ever hear about it? You didn't? Well, I suppose you'd like to know why the mice had a meeting. That's my story for you this morning. It seems that the mice were bothering a certain man a great deal. Every night the mice would leave their holes and steal the man's apples, flour, and potatoes. Well, that made the man angry. So the man decided to do something about it. I'll bet you know just what that man did. Yes, the man set a trap to catch the mice. Every night the man put a big piece of cheese in the trap, and every morning the man found a dead mouse in the trap. Well, after a while the mice became angry too. The mice wanted that cheese, but they didn't want to get caught. So one night the mice held a meeting in the cellar. Most of the mice, even some of the very little ones, went to the meeting. Now the thing that bothered the mice was this: how could they get that cheese without getting caught? That was the big question that the mice tried to answer at the meeting in the cellar. Most of the older mice made long speeches, and some of the younger mice talked too. Each one had a different way to get the cheese without getting caught. Finally a gray mouse stood up and began to speak. "Listen, there's only one way to get that cheese without getting caught. Hold down the spring of the trap with the claws of one foot. and take the cheese with the claws of your other foot." "That's right!" cried all the other mice as they clapped and nodded their heads. But just then a poor little mouse with only 3 legs limped from his place in the corner. The little 3-legged mouse began to speak. "My friends," said the little 3-legged mouse, "that plan will never work. I tried it once. I held the spring of the trap with the claws of one foot and tried to take the cheese with the claws of the other foot. Look at what happened to me. I lost a leg. Take my advice. If you don't want to get caught in that trap, let it alone. Let it alone. That was mighty good advice. And that's mighty good advice for you boys and girls. You know, there are certain persons, certain places, certain things that lead you into sin. They are like the cheese in the trap. They lead you on, and then, before you know it, you get caught in the trap of sin. If you don't want to get caught in the trap of sin, then keep away from these persons, places, and things that lead you into sin. Let them alone. Perhaps there is some boy or girl who swears or steals or disobeys. If you play with that boy or girl will want you to swear or steal or disobey. Maybe that boy or girl will even teach you to do these things. Well, the thing for you to do is to keep away from that boy or girl. That boy or girl will lead you into sin. There are plenty of good boys and girls in this world, and you don't have to play with the bad ones. Let the bad boys and the bad girls alone. There are places, too, where you will fall into sin. There are places where you will meet bad boys and girls. You don't want to fall into sin, do you? Well, then, keep away from those places where you'll meet bad boys and girls. You wouldn't walk into a burning house, would you? Of course not. If you did walk into a burning house, you would certainly get burned. Well, keep away from any place where you might fall into sin. Let it alone. Finally, there are things that will lead you into sin. What are they? Oh, there's any number of them. Books with bad pictures, dirty songs, dirty stories, bad movies. Why, your eyes, your ears, your nose, your mouth, your hands, your feet will lead you into sin if you are not careful. Yes, you have to be very careful because the devil is always on the job. The devil uses all kinds of tricks to lead you into sin. So be on your guard. Keep away from all persons, places, and things that will lead you into sin. Follow the advice of that 3-legged mouse. Let them alone. End of chapter 10. Chapter 11 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 11. I'm going to tell your mother. There was one thing that 8-year-old Jackie Breen wanted. It was an electric train that would run on tracks. A train that would start, stop, or run backwards at the pull of a switch. Yes, Jackie wanted an electric train, and he wanted it more than anything else in this world. Jackie had asked for an electric train for Christmas. He had even written a letter to Santa Claus and had told him what he wanted. But Christmas came and there was no electric train. Of course, the boy liked his new sled and he liked his model airplane. But it would have been a better Christmas if Jackie had received an electric train. The 21st of April was to be Jackie's birthday. For several days before his birthday, Jackie talked to his mother and father about electric trains. Kevin Sheridan had an electric train. Frankie Burke had one too. Oh, if he only had an electric train! What fun he would have! An electric train would make him very happy. Jackie did a lot of thinking. He did a lot of wondering too. What was he going to get for his birthday? He hoped that his father and mother wouldn't buy him any new clothes, because he didn't want new clothes. He didn't want books or money either. A new kite? Oh no, Jackie didn't want any of these things. Jackie wanted an electric train. The Sunday before his birthday, Jackie had an idea. "Maybe if I say some prayers," said the boy to himself, "Jesus will get me an electric train." The more Jackie thought about it, the more certain he was that Jesus would help him. Yes, he would pray and he would pray hard. Jesus would certainly help him. The next day was Monday. After school, little Jackie didn't go straight home. Do you know where he went? He went over to the church. Now, it happened that there were no people in the church, nobody but Jackie. The little boy tiptoed down the long aisle and knelt on the step before the altar. He said some Our Fathers and Hail Marys. Then, looking up at Jesus hanging on a cross, the little boy begged, "Please, Jesus, get me an electric train for my birthday." When his prayers were finished, Jackie Breen left the church and went home. The next day Jackie went to the church again. He said some more prayers, and once again the little boy begged Jesus to get him an electric train. He did the same thing on Wednesday. He went to the church again on Thursday, and again on Friday. During each visit the boy asked for one thing, an electric train. Saturday was Jackie's birthday. The boy was up bright and early. It was easy to get up that morning, because Jackie knew that there would be presents for him. Well, after breakfast, Jackie received his presents: 2 books, a top, a bag of marbles and agates, and a $1 bill. There was no electric train. Yes, Jackie was terribly disappointed. He felt like crying, but he managed to keep back the tears. Jesus had disappointed him. Jesus didn't get him an electric train. Now, that's not the end of the story. Oh, no! You'll never guess what Jackie did then. About 11 o'clock that morning Jackie left the house. His mother thought he was going out to play, but his mother was wrong. Instead, Jackie went to church. Down the aisle he walked and knelt before the altar. "Jesus," he said, as he looked up at the cross and shook his finger, "I prayed hard for 5 days, and you didn't pay any attention to me. You didn't get me an electric train. So, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to tell your mother." Then the little boy stood up, bent his right knee to the floor, and walked over to the side altar. He knelt before the statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and tears ran down his cheeks. "Mary," he said, "I want to tell you something about your boy. All week long I prayed hard for an electric train, and I didn't get what I wanted. You'd better speak to Jesus." That's all the little boy said, but he felt better after he had said it. Now Mary knew everything. Now Mary knew that Jesus hadn't answered his prayers. Well, that afternoon there was a party for Jackie, and all of his friends were there. Oh, they had a grand time at the party. They played games and had lots of fun. Yes, they had ice cream and cake, lemonade, peanuts, and candy. But the best part of the party came at the end. Just before the children left for their homes, Jackie's father brought in a big box. Jackie took the cover off the box, and what do you think? Yes, you guessed it. There in the box was an electric train, a train with tracks and switches. And was Jackie happy? Well, I think you know the answer. I wonder whether the Blessed Virgin Mary had anything to do with Jackie getting that electric train. I think she did. I think Mary spoke to Jesus, and I think, too, that Jesus spoke to Jackie's father. You know, Mary does things like that. She tells Jesus what little boys and girls want. She even asked Jesus to give boys and girls the things they want. When his mother asked for a favor, can Jesus refuse her? I don't think so. Look at what Mary did for little Jackie Breen. Mary will do the same for you if you will only ask her. When you pray, children, you pray to Jesus. That's the right thing to do. But every time you pray, be sure to say an extra prayer to Mary. Ask Mary to speak to Jesus for you. Jesus wants to please his mother, and he just can't say no to her. Remember, children, when you want something from Jesus, you don't have to shake your finger at him. Just tell Jesus what you want. Then do what Jackie Breen did. Go to Mary. End of chapter 11. Chapter 12 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 12. The Lost Child. Nobody likes to see a child cry. Whenever we see a child cry, we try to help the child. Isn't that right? Certainly! We want little boys and girls to be happy. We want little boys and girls to laugh and smile. We don't like to see a child cry. Well, the other day, a little 5-year-old boy stood in the center of a great railroad station. The boy was in trouble. He was crying as though his heart would break. A number of men and women, hearing the cries of the little boy, went up to the boy and tried to help him. "What's the matter, little boy?" asked several of the men and women. "Can't we help you? What's the matter?" The little boy paid no attention to the questions. The more the good people tried to help the little boy, the more the little boy cried. Finally, a kind-hearted policeman came along. The policeman, too, wondered what was the matter. And so he stooped down and lifted the little boy in his arms. "Well, little fellow," spoke the policeman kindly, "won't you tell me what's the matter? Why are you crying? Did you lose your mother?" For a moment the little boy held his breath. Then he cried out at the top of his voice, "No, I didn't lose my mother. My mother lost me." Boys and girls, we have a mother, the Blessed Virgin Mary. When Jesus hung on the cross, didn't Jesus give Mary to us to be our mother? Certainly, He did. Well, Mary acts just like a mother to all of us. Mary watches over us and protects us. She keeps us from harm. She helps us to save our souls. Yes, Mary acts as a real mother to every one of us. And best of all, Mary is always near us. She never runs away from us. But do you know what happens sometimes? Very often, Mary loses us. There are some little boys, yes, and little girls too, who run away from Mary. Like the little boy in the story, these boys and girls get lost. They get away from Mary, their mother. They get away from Mary because they don't pray to her. Mary wants to be near them, but they run away. You know, boys and girls never lose Mary, but sometimes Mary loses boys and girls. Do you remember the time when the child Jesus was lost? What happened? Why, the very same thing happened to Jesus that happened to the little boy in the story. Jesus didn't lose Mary. Oh, no! Mary lost Jesus. For 3 days Mary searched for Jesus, and finally she found Him. Maybe Mary has lost you. Have you been praying to Mary lately? Have you been praying to Mary every day? Have you been saying Hail Marys to the Blessed Virgin every day? Have you been saying your rosary? Well, if you haven't been doing these things, then Mary has lost you. Right at this moment, children, Mary is looking for you. She wants to find you because she is worried about you. Mary is afraid that you'll get into trouble. Mary is afraid that you'll fall into sin. Boys and girls, keep close to Mary, your mother. Pray to her often. Pray to her every day. If you do that, Mary, your mother, will protect you. She will help you save your soul. If you pray to Mary every day, children, you won't get lost. If you pray to Mary every day, Mary won't lose you, and you won't lose Mary. End of chapter 12. Chapter 13 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 13. God's Service Flag. Whenever our country is at war, people hang service flags in their windows. Service flags, you know, are made of red and white cloth and have blue stars sewed on them. The number of stars on the flag tells how many people in a family have gone to war. If a family has one person who has gone to war, they hang up a service flag with 1 blue star on the flag. 2 blue stars mean that the family has 2 persons who are fighting for their country. 3 blue stars on a service flag means that 3 persons in that family have gone to war. Now, sometimes there will be a gold star on a service flag. I suppose you are wondering what a gold star means. Well, a gold star means that a person has died serving his country. So a blue star on a service flag means that the soldier or sailor is living. A gold star on a service flag means that a soldier or sailor has died. One evening 8-year-old Evelyn Green and her father went for a walk. The father had told his little girl all about the service flags, and Evelyn started to count the stars on the service flags which hung in the different windows. She found that almost every home had a service flag with, at least, one blue star. Some homes had 2 blue stars on their service flag. Yes, and Evelyn saw one service flag that had 4 blue stars. But when Evelyn saw one flag with a gold star on it, the little girl was very sad. Evelyn knew right away that a soldier or sailor had died. Evelyn and her father walked for some time. When it became dark they couldn't see the service flags hanging in the windows, so the father and the little girl talked about other things. It was quite dark when Evelyn and her father reached home. As they walked into the yard, Evelyn looked up into the sky. And what do you think she saw? There was only one star shining up above. "Look, Daddy," said the little girl, pointing up to the sky. "There's only one star up there. Is that God's service flag?" The girl's father didn't answer right away. He waited a minute and then put his hand on the little girl's shoulder. "Yes, Evelyn," said the father kindly, "that's God's service flag. That one star is up in the sky because God gave His only Son." God's service flag. One star in the sky because God gave His only Son. Evelyn wanted to hear more about God's only Son. So after they went into the house, the little girl begged her father to tell her more. Evelyn wanted to know more about God's service flag. She wanted to know how God gave His only Son. "Over 1900 years ago," began the girl's father, "this world was full of sin. Now God didn't like sin, and God didn't want people to break His laws. So God sent His only Son, Jesus, down to earth, and Jesus lived on this earth for 33 years. During all those 33 years Jesus fought against sin. Jesus was really a soldier who fought sin. Jesus fought to make people good, so that when they would die, they would go to heaven. Of course, many people listened to Jesus, and they stopped making sins and tried to be good. But there were some bad people, Evelyn, who fought Jesus. Yes, there were some bad people who refused to give up their sins. Why, those bad people even hated Jesus. And that isn't all. One day some of those bad soldiers nailed Jesus to a cross. And Jesus, the soldier, died upon that cross. Jesus died upon that cross, Evelyn, for you and for me and for the whole world. Jesus died to save all of us from sin. Jesus died to open the gates of heaven for us. Yes, Evelyn, God gave us His only Son, Jesus, and Jesus, by His death, made it easy for us to get to heaven." When the story was finished, little Evelyn thanked her father for telling her all about Jesus. Evelyn had learned how and why Jesus had died upon a cross. Children, I hope that you, too, have learned how Jesus died and why. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Rev. Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 14. The World's Greatest Book. Did you ever wonder how many books there are in this world? Why, there are millions of books in this world. Books in libraries, books in schools, books in stores, books in homes. There are all kinds of books. History books, geography books, spelling books, story books, picture books, and many other kinds of books. It seems as though this world is just filled with books. Of course, some books are not very good, but there are many books that are very, very fine. I wonder whether any boy or girl knows which book is the best book in the world. Which book is the world's greatest book? Well, boys and girls, the world's greatest book was written on 2 pieces of wood. The words of the book were written in blood. The pages of the book were fastened together by 5 nails. There was only one chapter in the book, and it told a sad story. Yes, that story was a story of love. Now, I suppose you are all wondering what the name of that book was. Would you like to know the name of the world's greatest book? Listen to this story. Many, many years ago there lived a very holy priest, Father Francis. Now, Father Francis was a very old man. He had been a priest for 52 years. Well, Father Francis was taken sick, and for 10 months he wasn't able to leave his bed. Every day he became weaker and weaker. One day a friend went to visit the sick priest. After they had a visit, the friend said the rosary, and Father Francis answered the prayers. Then, when the rosary was finished, Father Francis made a strange request. "Please," said the old man to his friend, "bring me my book." The friend wondered at this strange request. He knew that Father Francis wasn't able to read, yet he wanted to please the poor old man. So the friend went to a desk, picked up a prayer book, and handed the prayer book to Father Francis. Father Francis held the prayer book for just a moment and shook his head. Then he handed the prayer book back. "Bring me my book," said the old priest a second time. The friend was puzzled. "Maybe he wants his Mass book," thought the friend to himself. The friend arose, went to a table, and there he found a small Mass book. He handed the Mass book to Father Francis, but the old priest pushed the book aside. Father Francis closed his eyes. His voice was weak, but he repeated for the 3rd time, "Bring me my book. Bring me my book." "Father Francis," said the kind friend, "you have many books. Which book do you want?" The old priest didn't answer for a long time. Then he barely whispered, "Bring me my book. Bring me my book." The old priest's friend didn't know just what to do. He thought, perhaps, Father Francis was dreaming. Anyway, he noticed a crucifix hanging on the wall. The friend took the crucifix from the wall and placed the crucifix in the priest's hands. Father Francis held the crucifix tightly. He opened his eyes and stared at the crucifix for a long time. Then tears ran down his cheeks and he whispered, "Thanks, my friend, for bringing my book. For years this crucifix has been my book. This crucifix is the world's greatest book." Father Francis didn't say any more. Within 3 minutes the priest was dead. Father Francis died holding the crucifix in his hands. The crucifix, the world's greatest book. Yes, boys and girls, the crucifix is the world's greatest book. If you study that book, well, you'll learn many things. If you study the crucifix, you'll know why Jesus hangs there. Why did Jesus suffer so much? Because of sin. Jesus hated sin, and Jesus knew that sin would keep you out of heaven. Jesus felt that by His death you would learn to hate sin, and thus you would save your soul. Oh, I hope that each one of you will make the crucifix your greatest book. Study the crucifix. Look at it often. Think. I promise you that if you study the crucifix and think about the sufferings of Jesus, you'll learn to hate sin. That's what Jesus wants you to do, to hate sin. And if you hate sin, I know that you won't fall into sin. There is something else that you'll know if you study the crucifix. You'll know how much Jesus loves you. Jesus loves you so much that He died for you. Now, how much do you love Jesus? When you commit sin, do you show Jesus that you love Him? No, you do not. Boys and girls, at the foot of the cross you'll learn many things. You'll learn to hate sin. You'll learn to love Christ. Remember, the crucifix is the world's greatest book. Make the crucifix your greatest book. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Rev. Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 15. The Bishop's Story. Many years ago there lived a king who had great love for the Blessed Virgin Mary. He wanted to show this love for the Mother of God in a very special way. So he built a church in honor of the Blessed Virgin Mary. When the church was finished, the king wanted to place the body of Mary under the altar of his church. But he had heard that Mary's body had been buried in the city of Jerusalem. Perhaps the Bishop of Jerusalem would help the king find the body. Perhaps, too, the bishop would let him move the body to his church. Anyway, the king decided to try, and so he sent for the bishop. "Please help me find the body of God's mother," the king begged the bishop. "Surely the body of Mary is the most precious thing in the world. I want to put Mary's body in a golden casket and place it in my church under an altar of marble and precious stones." The Bishop of Jerusalem answered the king by telling a strange story. When the apostles, who had been working in different parts of the world, heard that Mary was sick, they hurried back to Jerusalem. They wanted to be near the Blessed Mother. They felt that Mary needed them. Perhaps they could help her. Well, Mary died, and at the moment of her death angels appeared in the room, and the apostles heard beautiful music. Then the apostles carried the body of Mary and placed it in a tomb in the Garden of Gethsemane. 3 days after Mary had been buried, the apostle, Thomas, who had been away, arrived in the city of Jerusalem. Thomas wanted to see the body of Mary, and so the apostle opened the tomb. But Mary's body was not there. The tomb was empty. What had happened? Oh, the apostles knew what had happened. Mary's body had never sinned. Her body was precious, too precious to leave in a tomb. Jesus, who had been so good to Mary while she was alive, was good to her also after her death. Jesus didn't allow Mary's body to turn into dust. Jesus sent angels to take Mary's body from the tomb, and those angels carried her body to heaven. Mary died in the arms of the apostles. She awoke in the arms of Christ. Boys and girls, when God made you, He gave you a body and a soul. Your soul, of course, is very precious. But your body, too, is precious. Your body is the house where your soul lives. Then, too, every time you receive Holy Communion, your body becomes a home for Jesus Christ. You can see, therefore, that your body is a very important part of you. You know, children, some people think that your soul alone should be good. But God wants your body to be good, too. God wants your eyes to read good books. He wants your ears to hear kind words. God wants your tongue to tell the truth and to speak good. He wants you to use your hands for work and for clean play, and He wants you to join those hands in prayer. God wants your feet to take you to places that are good, places where you'll do good. In a word, God wants you to keep your body like Mary's body, free from sin. Every time you say the Apostles' Creed, you say the words, "I believe in the resurrection of the body." What does that mean? It means just this. Some day, children, you will die. Your body will be carried to the cemetery and placed in a grave. Will your body remain in that grave forever? No. Some day your body will rise from the grave. Yes, just as the angels came down for Mary's body, they too will come down for yours. Oh, I hope that the angels will take your body to Christ, and that it will live forever with Christ. That will be your reward. If you keep your body precious, if you keep it free from sin, Mary has shown you the way. That way leads to Christ. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Rev. Gerald Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 16. The Girl Who Didn't Want to Go to Heaven. One day, Sister Judith told the first-grade children all about heaven. She told the children that when they would go to heaven, they would see God and the Blessed Virgin Mary. They would also see St. Joseph and all the other saints. They would see the angels, too, and they would hear the angels sing. Then Sister Judith told the children how happy they would be in heaven, how they would never have to work or suffer. Everything in heaven would make them happy. Little 6-year-old Mary Pat listened to every word that Sister Judith spoke. Then and there the little girl knew that she wanted to go to heaven. On her way home from school, Mary Pat told her older cousin Frank what Sister Judith had said. But Frank just laughed when he heard the little girl telling about heaven. "Aw, I'll bet that they don't have hot dogs or merry-go-rounds in heaven," said the boy to Mary Pat. "If nobody works in heaven, then they don't have ice cream or cake either." That was all that Frank said, but that was enough. It was just enough to puzzle little Mary Pat, and to make her wonder. Heaven without hot dogs? Heaven without merry-go-rounds? Heaven without ice cream and cake? Why, Mary Pat felt that she needed all these things to make her happy. How could she be happy without hot dogs, merry-go-rounds, ice cream, and cake? If these things were true, then she didn't want to go to heaven. That evening Mary Pat's mother knelt beside the little girl's bed. It was time for Mary Pat to say her prayers. But the little girl didn't kneel down to pray. Oh, no. Do you know what she did? Mary Pat climbed into bed. "Why, Mary Pat," the girl's mother couldn't understand. "Aren't you going to say your prayers? You know, if you don't say your prayers, you won't go to heaven." "I don't want to go to heaven," cried the little girl. The mother knew that something was wrong. She hugged the little girl tightly and wiped away her tears. "Tell me, Mary Pat, what's the matter? Why don't you want to go to heaven?" Mary Pat cried some more. It took a long time, but finally the words came out. "Sister Judith told us today that we'd have everything in heaven to make us happy. But Frank said that there will be no hot dogs or merry-go-rounds or ice cream and cake. How can I be happy without these things? No, I don't want to go to heaven." "Mary Pat," said her mother kindly, "Frank told you wrong, and everything that Sister Judith said is true. Heaven is a very beautiful place, the most beautiful place that God ever made. God is up in heaven, and His Blessed Mother is up there too. Yes, and St. Joseph is there, and all the other good people who ever lived on this earth. There are angels, too, hundreds and hundreds of angels. And that isn't all. You'll find everything in heaven to make you happy. No one is sad up there, and no one cries. Why, when you see God, you'll be so happy that you won't need hot dogs or merry-go-rounds or ice cream and cake." Then the mother asked a question. "Mary Pat, do you remember what happened when you got your new doll last Christmas? Your new doll made you so happy that you forgot all about your old dolls. Well, that's the way it will be in heaven. When you see God, you'll forget all about hot dogs, merry-go-rounds, ice cream, and cake. You won't need these things to make you happy. You'll have God, and God will make you so happy you'll forget all about these other things." When the mother finished talking, little Mary Pat clapped her hands. Now she wasn't afraid to go to heaven. In fact, the little girl told her mother that she wanted to go to heaven and that she was going to work hard to get there. Children, I think that someday Mary Pat will go to heaven because she wants to go to heaven. People who don't want to go to heaven will never get there. Now it's the same way with you. The first thing that you have to do is to want to go to heaven. If you want to go, then I know that you'll work hard to get to heaven. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 17. The Loyal Americans. What do you do when you hear a band play The Star-Spangled Banner? You do what every real American does. You stand up. And why do you stand? You stand because you know that the Star-Spangled Banner is the song of our country. You stand as a sign of respect for our country and our flag. You stand because you love the flag, because our flag stands for America and for everything that is fine and good. Now for our story. It's about a girl named Catherine. This girl was a real American, and she was a Girl Scout, too. As a Girl Scout, Catherine had learned to love our flag, the red, white, and blue. She felt that our flag is the best flag in the world because our flag stands for America. At her Scout meetings and at camp, Catherine had been taught to stand whenever she heard the Star-Spangled Banner. Well, one night Catherine's father and mother were listening to the radio. Catherine was upstairs in bed, but she was not asleep. She too was listening to the radio, and she heard a band playing fine music. At the end of the program the band played the Star-Spangled Banner. Then what do you think Catherine did? She jumped out of bed and stood in the dark while the band played. Then, all of a sudden, Catherine happened to think about her 4-year-old sister, who was in the next room. "Ethel, Ethel!" called Catherine to her younger sister. "The band is playing the Star-Spangled Banner. Stand up!" And was Catherine surprised? Out of the dark came the voice of the younger sister. "Oh, I knows what to do. I's standing up." Now I'm sure that you boys and girls know what to do when you hear the Star-Spangled Banner. I know that you always stand up. You stand up because you love your flag, because you love America, because you love everything that is fine and good. Catholic boys and girls always love their flag. They love their country. You love your flag. You love your country too. But what about your love for Jesus Christ? Does your love for Christ come before your love for your flag and your country? Well, it should. Now, if you really love Christ, you will always stand up for Christ. You will stand up for all the fine things that Jesus taught. I wonder whether you always stand up and do all the fine things that Jesus has asked you to do. Do you say your prayers every day? Do you go to Mass every Sunday? Do you go to confession and Holy Communion often? Do you stand up for the truth and never tell lies? Do you obey your parents? Do you refuse to steal? Are you honest? Do you stand up and speak the name of Jesus with love? If you do these things, boys and girls, then you stand up for Jesus Christ. You stand up for everything that is fine and good. You show Jesus that you love Him. Sometimes boys and girls don't stand up for Christ. They don't do what Jesus wants them to do. They disobey, tell lies, cheat, steal, miss Mass on Sundays, eat meat on Fridays, say bad words. When boys and girls do these things, when they don't keep the commandments, they are not loyal to Christ. Oh, I hope that no boy or girl in this church will ever go back on Christ. Remember, children, it's not enough to tell Jesus that you love Him. You must prove to Him that you love Him. At all times, show Jesus that you love Him by your actions. Stand up for Jesus Christ. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 18. The Man Who Forgot God. The Man Who Forgot God. That's the name of my story for this morning. Michael was the name of the man in the story. Yes, Michael was the man who forgot God. What did Michael do? Well, here is his story. Michael owned a store where he sold ice cream and candy. Michael's store was always a very busy place, and Michael made lots of money. Every day, even on Sunday, Michael worked in his store from early morning until late at night. Michael was so busy making money that he forgot all about God. Michael wouldn't even take time off on Sunday to go to Mass. Now, Michael had a daughter. Her name was Jenny. Jenny was a fine girl, a girl who, even though she worked hard, always had time for God. Every morning Jenny came downstairs, threw her arms around her father, kissed him, and went off to Mass. After Mass, Jenny came back to her father's store and worked in the store all day. Jenny always seemed to be very happy. But there was something that bothered Jenny. It was her father. Jenny worried a great deal about her father. She worried because her father never went to Mass. Every day while Jenny was in church, she prayed that her father would go to Mass. Jenny wanted her father to save his soul. Finally, one day Jenny asked her father a question. "Father," she asked, "why is it that you never go to Mass?" "Why should I go to Mass?" was the father's answer. "Why, I don't have to go to Mass. God is up in heaven, and I'm down here. God loves me, and I love Him. God knows that I love Him, and I don't have to prove to Him that I love Him. God understands everything, so why should I go to Mass?" Jenny didn't try to answer her father's question. Jenny was hurt. She was hurt inside. For several days Jenny thought about what her father had said. She knew that her father was wrong. Finally, Jenny decided that she would teach her father a lesson. The next morning Jenny came downstairs as usual, but she didn't throw her arms around her father, nor did she kiss him. She merely said "Hello" to her father and went off to Mass. After Mass, Jenny came back to her father's store and worked hard all day. The next day Jenny did the same thing. In fact, Jenny did the same thing for several days. She didn't hug or kiss her father in the morning. She said hello, went off to Mass, and then returned to work in her father's store. The father began to worry. He knew that something was wrong. So one day the old man spoke to his daughter. "Jenny," asked the old man, "don't you love me any more?" "Yes, father, certainly I love you." "Well, Jenny," said the old man, and he began to cry, "if you still love me, you certainly don't show it. You used to kiss me every morning and show me that you love me, but lately you have changed. How can I tell that you still love me when you don't show it?" Jenny's plan had worked. She knew that she was about to teach her father a lesson. "Father," said the girl, "when I spoke to you about going to Mass, you said that you loved God and that God knew that you loved Him. You said that you didn't have to prove to God that you love Him. Well, Father, you love me and I love you. Why, then, should I have to prove to you that I love you?" For several minutes the old man stared at his daughter. Finally he shook his head. "Jenny," he said, "I've made a mistake. You have taught me a lesson. It isn't enough for me to know that you love me. I want you to show me that you love me. And it's the same way with God. It isn't enough for God to know that I love Him. I have to show God that I love Him." Yes, children, it's not enough for us to tell God that we love Him. We have to show God that we love Him. God is our Father, and we are God's children. Now, God doesn't want us to take Him for granted. God doesn't want us to forget Him. God wants us to show Him that we love Him. How can we show God that we love Him? Oh, there are so many ways by which we can show God that we love Him. True, we can't throw our arms around God and hug Him, but we can talk to God every day. We can pray to God every day. That's one way of showing God that we love Him. Then, too, every time we go to Mass, we show God that we love Him. Every time we receive Holy Communion, we show God in a special way that we love Him. Yes, and every time we keep one of God's laws, we show God that we love Him. Our prayers, our Masses, our Holy Communions, our obedience to God's laws, all these prove to God that we love Him. Children, God never forgets about you. God thinks about you every second of the day and night. Don't you ever forget God. Don't you ever act like the man in our story. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 19. The Fairy Pole. Little 8-year-old Doris Miller lived in a stone house near the seashore. Like her father, Doris loved the sea. Sometimes the sea would be angry with its wild waves. Then again the sea would be peaceful and calm. Oh, it was fun living near the sea, watching the sea, talking to the sea, listening to the sea. There was one place on the shore where Doris liked to play. A short distance from her home there were some big rocks that formed a circle on the beach. When the tide came in and the sea was angry, the water would dash over the rocks and make a pool. This pool, Doris felt, belonged to her. It was her pool, and she gave it a special name. Doris called it the fairy pool. Every day little Doris went to the fairy pool. She would sit on the rocks and look down into the clear blue water. The pool was always so lovely, so beautiful, so clear. Why, Doris could even see the bottom of the pool. She'd count the lovely shells in the pool, and each day the number of shells would be different. Each day, she thought, the fairies took out the old shells and put in new ones. Now it happened that one day Doris was not a good girl. She disobeyed her mother. The mother had asked the girl to go on an errand. But Doris didn't go on the errand. Instead, she went to the fairy pool. The little girl sat on the rocks and looked down into the fairy pool. And what do you think? Instead of clear water, the water was muddy, and the girl couldn't see the lovely shells. And that's not all. As she looked closely, Doris saw an ugly snake in the water, a snake that stared at her with glassy eyes. Was Doris afraid? You bet she was afraid. The little girl jumped up quickly and tears ran down her cheeks. The pool had always been so beautiful, but today it was muddy. What had happened? What had happened to her fairy pool? Just then Doris thought she heard a noise. She turned her head. There, standing on a rock, was a beautiful little lady, a lady dressed in silver and gold, a lady who held a gold rod in her hand. "Little girl," asked the lady kindly, "are you sad because the pool is muddy? Are you sad because you can't see the pretty shells?" "Yes," answered Doris as she tried to hold back the tears. "Something has happened to my fairy pool." The little lady nodded her head. "I know all about it, little girl. I know what has happened to the fairy pool." "You do?" asked Doris excitedly. "Yes," said the little lady. "I know everything because I am the queen of the fairy pool. The pool is muddy today, and you can't see the pretty shells because you have not been good. You disobeyed today. You disobeyed your mother. The clear water and the pretty shells can only be seen when you are good, when you obey." "Oh, I know I have done wrong!" cried Doris, and she was ashamed. "I'll go on that errand. I'll go right now." The little girl turned quickly and ran away. Yes, she ran all the way to her neighbor's home. She told the neighbor her mother's message and then hurried back to the fairy pool. Yes, the little lady was waiting, and she seemed pleased when she saw the girl again. Before Doris had a chance to speak, the queen of the fairy pool waved her rod in the air. "Now," said the queen to the little girl, "look into the pool." At first Doris was afraid. Was the snake still there in the muddy water? Would the snake jump out of the muddy water? No, children, none of that. The little girl looked into the pool. And was she surprised? There was no snake in the pool, no muddy water. Instead, the water was clear. Yes, and the pretty shells were there too. Once again little Doris was very happy. "Thank you, lovely lady," said the little girl as she clapped her hands. The queen of the fairy pool smiled. "Little girl," she said, "I hope that you have learned a lesson. Always obey your parents. God has given you a father and a mother, and they take God's place. When you obey your parents, you obey God, who has given you the fairy pool and so much happiness." Once again the queen waved her rod of gold. In an instant she disappeared. Doris was alone. Alone, but very happy. The little girl had learned the secret of the fairy pool. Children, your heart is like the fairy pool. Each day God looks into your heart. When He sees that you are good, when He sees that you obey, God is pleased and He blesses you. But if you disobey, what does God see in your heart? He sees a sin, a black sin, a sin that is like the ugly snake in the fairy pole. The sin of disobedience hurts God. It makes Him turn away His face. It displeases Him. Your mother and father know what God wants you to do. Obey your parents, because when you obey them, you obey God. Don't let the sin of disobedience dirty your soul. If you obey at all times, then, when God looks into your soul, He will find it clean and beautiful, just like the water in the fairy pole. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 20. A Piece of Glass. Robert and Helen were brother and sister. Robert was 10 years old and his sister was 9. Like all brothers and sisters, Robert and Helen loved each other very much. They played together, read the funnies together, worked together, and went to school together. They seemed to have lots of fun, and they were always very happy. But one day last summer, something very unpleasant happened. Robert and Helen had a quarrel. Robert became very angry, and Helen became angry too. Both said a lot of unkind things, and after the quarrel was over, each child refused to speak to the other. Well, this went on for some time. All morning long neither spoke to the other. At noon the children's mother spoke to them. She tried to make the children see that they were doing wrong. But the children just listened. Robert refused to speak to Helen, and Helen refused to speak to Robert. Of course, the mother was hurt. Something had to be done. The mother wondered what she could do to make the children forget their quarrel. How could she make Robert forgive his sister? How could she make Helen forgive her brother? Oh, the mother thought and thought for a long time. Then, all of a sudden, she had an idea. "Robert," asked the mother, "will you wash the kitchen windows on the outside for me?" Certainly, Robert would help his mother. He was only too glad to help her. After all, Robert liked to wash windows. That wasn't work. That was fun. Robert took a pail of water and a short ladder and went out into the yard. In a short time the boy was busy washing the first window. "Now, Helen," said the mother, "I want you to wash the kitchen windows on the inside." Helen, too, was anxious to help her mother. So it wasn't very long before Helen was washing the inside of the first window. There was Robert on the outside washing the first window, Helen on the inside washing the first window. 2 children with anger in their hearts, washing the same window. I suppose you're wondering what happened. Well, every time Robert looked through the window and saw Helen's face, he frowned and looked very angry. And every time Helen looked through the window and saw the terrible look on Robert's face, she frowned, too, and looked very angry. Making faces through a window. That's just what the children were doing. When the first window was finished, the children moved on to the second window. Robert on the outside, Helen on the inside. Both children with sour faces. Both children with anger in their hearts. While the children were washing the second window, Helen looked at Robert. What a terrible look on his face! She had never seen her brother look so ugly. Why, that ugly look on Robert's face was really funny. It was very funny. Helen couldn't help but smile. Robert saw Helen smile. And what do you think? Helen's smile made Robert smile. Then Helen laughed. Robert couldn't help it, and he laughed too. In a moment both children were laughing heartily, laughing at each other, laughing at themselves. The mother's plan had worked. A piece of glass had shown the children how ugly each one had looked. A piece of glass had taught Robert and Helen a lesson. I think that you, too, children, have learned a lesson. Robert and Helen were not happy after their quarrel. If you quarrel, if you get angry, if you lose your temper, if you carry a grudge, you won't be happy either. Don't quarrel with your brothers, your sisters, your friends. If you could only see yourself when you get angry or quarrel, I'm certain that you'd stop right away. Little people, people with small hearts, selfish people, are the only ones who ever quarrel. Big people, people with big hearts, never lose their temper. Big people never become angry. Big people never quarrel. Remember, God loves your brothers, your sisters, and your friends. God gave you brothers, sisters, and friends to help you be happy. If you didn't have them, you'd be very lonesome, very unhappy. There's no fun in being mad at anybody. A quarrel isn't fun either. Oh, no. So be kind to everybody, especially to your brothers and sisters. Boys and girls, make your home a place of happiness. Make it a home of love. Remember, God likes happy children. God loves happy children. Do you want to be happy? Well, then, the next time you're tempted to get angry or quarrel, just look at yourself in a mirror. That piece of glass will make you laugh. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 21. The Two Brothers. This morning I'm going to tell you one of my favorite stories. It's a story about two brothers who lived in the state of Ohio. The older brother was Frank. He was 20. The younger brother was Eddie. He was 18. Frank and Eddie were always together. They were real brothers, real friends. One day Frank and Eddie decided to join the army. They wanted to be soldiers. They wanted to fight for their country. Well, that's just what they did. Frank and Eddie joined the army. They became soldiers. When the brothers left home, they both promised their mother that they would try to keep together, and each brother promised that he would look after the other. Well, everything went fine. Frank and Eddie were sent to the same camp. They were in the same company. They trained together. They marched together. They worked together. They ate together. They slept in the same tent. So far, the two brothers had kept the promises that they had made to their mother. After months of training, Frank and Eddie were sent across the sea, and, sure enough, Frank and Eddie crossed the ocean in the same ship. The brothers were still together, still keeping the promises that they had made to their mother. One night, when the brothers were in a far-off land, an order was given that, the next day, the soldiers would go into battle. So, early the next morning, the soldiers were on their way. About 10 o'clock they met the enemy. Oh, it was a hard battle, a bloody battle. For 6 hours both sides fought hard, but our men were too strong for the enemy. 6 hours of terrible fighting, but the Stars and Stripes came out on top. Now, what about Frank and Eddie? Well, when the battle was over, Eddie was missing. Something seemed to strike Frank right in the heart. He shook from head to foot. Where was Eddie? Where was Eddie? Something had to be done. He had to find Eddie. Frank helped his companions to take care of the wounded. He went from one wounded soldier to the other, but there was no Eddie. He called out Eddie's name, but there was no answer. But Frank didn't give up. He knew that Eddie was somewhere, and he was bound to find him. Frank searched for an hour, and finally he found a soldier who was covered with blood. The soldier was Eddie. Eddie had been wounded, and he was about to die. Just before he breathed his last, Eddie looked up at his faithful brother and smiled. "Frank," he said, "you didn't disappoint me. I knew you'd come." You didn't disappoint me. I knew you'd come. A little boy finds it hard to learn arithmetic. He studies at home and works hard in school, but somehow he just can't get arithmetic. The examinations are coming, and he doesn't want to fail. That boy knows someone who will help him. So what does he do? Every night after school that little boy goes over to church. He kneels down in front of the altar, tells Jesus that arithmetic is hard for him, and begs Jesus to help him. And what does Jesus say to that little boy? "You didn't disappoint me. I knew you'd come." Sunday after Sunday you come to Mass. Yes, and many of you children come to Mass during the week. It's hard to get up in the morning, but you get up and come anyway. You come because you know that the Mass is the best prayer. You know that the Mass will bring you lots of grace. At the middle of the Mass a bell rings. The priest raises Jesus high up over your heads. You look up at Jesus, and Jesus speaks to you. What does Jesus say? "You didn't disappoint me. I knew you'd come." Someone is sick at home. Perhaps your father and mother are worried about something. Perhaps you want something for yourself. You need help. You need the help of a friend, the help of a real friend like Jesus. What do? You receive Jesus in Holy Communion. Then, before you even ask for anything, how does Jesus show you that He is your friend? Why, His very first words fill you with hope. "You didn't disappoint me. I knew you'd come." If I were an artist, and if I were asked to paint the world's greatest picture, what do you think my picture would be? Would it be a picture of a child receiving his first Holy Communion? No, it would not. Would it be a picture of a priest saying his first Mass? No, that wouldn't be my picture. Would it be the picture of a smiling baby or a beautiful rose? No, my picture would be none of these. If I were an artist, and if I were asked to paint the world's greatest picture, I'd paint a picture of a little child kneeling alone in a great church, a little child whose eyes looked up at the altar, a child talking to God. It would be the picture of a child who had visited with Jesus often, a child who had often heard Jesus say, "You didn't disappoint me. I knew you'd come." Children, Jesus is here on our altar. Jesus wants to keep close to you, and He wants you to keep close to Him. Jesus wants you to visit Him often. He wants you to come to Mass. He wants you to receive Him in Holy Communion. Remember, Jesus is your friend. Don't neglect Him. If you go to Jesus often, children, Jesus will come to you when you will need Him most. Like Eddie in our story, someday you, too, will die. Before you die, you'll be sick and you'll suffer. But Jesus will be right there to help you. Yes, Jesus will come to you in your suffering. Jesus will stretch out His arms to help you, and there will be a smile on His face. And, as you look up into the smiling face of Christ, I know what you'll say to Him. "Jesus, you didn't disappoint me. I knew you'd come." End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Going His Way. Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 22. The Boy Hero. In your geography classes you've learned about sunny Spain. Well, my story this morning is about Spain, but it's not about sunny Spain. My story is about a sad Spain, because Spain was at war. Spain was at war with her enemies. It seems that the enemies of Spain were attacking the city of Toledo. In the city of Toledo there was a large castle, which the Spanish people had turned into a fort. In this castle, or fort, there were about 1,000 people. A few children, some women, and a large number of soldiers. The soldiers were under the charge of Colonel Moscardo. For 3 days the enemy tried to make Colonel Moscardo and his soldiers stop fighting. The enemy used all kinds of tricks and schemes, but Colonel Moscardo refused to give up. In the midst of the fighting, Colonel Moscardo was called to his office. There was a very important telephone call for the colonel. Someone wanted to speak to Colonel Moscardo. The colonel hurried up the stairs of the castle and entered his office. He sat before a large wooden desk. He picked up the phone. "Hello?" said the colonel. Then he waited. "We have captured your son, Luis," said the voice of one of the enemy over the phone. "He is here with us now. If you don't stop fighting within 10 minutes, your son will be shot." "My son?" called out the Colonel. "I don't believe you. You're trying to trap me with one of your schemes. If my son is there, let me speak to him." For a moment there was silence. Then another voice came over the wire, the voice of a 16-year-old boy. It was the voice of Luis Moscardo, the son of the Colonel. "Father," said the boy, "they've told me that they'll kill me if you don't stop fighting. What shall I do? I'll do whatever you tell me." Colonel Moscardo's face turned pale. He tried to think. Should he give his country to the enemy and save his boy? Or should he tell his boy to die and save Spain for his people? There was only one answer. Colonel Moscardo's voice was very clear. "Luis," he said, "I can't stop fighting. I can't give my country to the enemy. You must die for your country. Beg God to help you, and die like a hero." The Colonel listened. "Father," he heard, "I'll die for my country. I'll die for you." The father listened for more words from his son, but no other words were spoken. Then a terrible sound came ringing over the wire into the Colonel's ears. It was the sound of a shot from a gun. Then the Colonel heard a noise as if something had fallen heavily upon the floor. Yes, Luis Moscardo, the Colonel's son, had been shot. Luis Moscardo died because his father asked him to die. Luis Moscardo died for his country. If there ever was a hero, it was Luis Moscardo. Children, on the first Holy Thursday night, Jesus Christ knelt in a garden, and Jesus called up to his Father in heaven and asked his Father what he should do. And what did God the Father ask his Son to do? God asked Jesus, his Son, to give up his life, to die for us. And what did Jesus answer? Children, you know the answer Jesus gave. Jesus, too, told his Father that he would do whatever his Father wanted him to do. And the very next day, the first Good Friday, Jesus did what his Father asked him to do. Jesus gave up his life by dying on a cross. Jesus died for you, for me. Yes, Jesus died for the whole world, the world's greatest hero, Jesus Christ. That isn't all, children. Oh, no. Every morning God lets his Son die again on our altar. In every Mass, Jesus dies again. And why does Jesus die? To free the world from sin. Jesus dies for our sins. He dies to wash away our sins. He dies to win us from sin. Children, there isn't any prayer that pleases God more than the Mass. The Mass is the greatest prayer, the best prayer. That's why God wants us to come to Mass often. Jesus doesn't die just once a week. Jesus dies every day. That's why God wants us to come to Mass not just once a week, but every day, if it is possible. God wants us to pray the Mass every single day. God wants us to give Him the best prayer every single day. Why, then, don't you come to Mass more often? Why don't you get up a little earlier each morning and stop in for Mass on your way to school? Hundreds and thousands of people, men and women, go to Mass every day. Why don't you? You'll meet Christ at Mass. You'll get so many, many graces. Graces that you need. Graces that will help you all through the day. The Mass, children, is for you. The Mass is Jesus dying for you. Show Jesus that you are grateful for what He is doing for you. Come to Mass. Come to Mass often. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 23. The First Sleeper. Eutychus. That's a strange name for a boy, isn't it? Well, I'm going to tell you about a boy named Eutychus. I think you'd like to hear his story. Eutychus lived shortly after the time when Jesus was on earth. Time and time again Eutychus heard stories about Jesus. How Jesus walked on the water, how Jesus changed water into wine, how Jesus cured the blind. But the best story of all was the one that his mother told him, how Jesus died for him, and after 3 days Jesus began to live again. Well, one day there was great excitement in the little town where Eutychus lived. St. Paul, one of the apostles, was coming to town. Yes, St. Paul would be in town the next day. The apostle was coming to tell the people about Jesus. Of course, everybody wanted to hear St. Paul. Everybody wanted to hear his stories. Everybody wanted to hear about Jesus. So the next evening a large crowd was on hand to hear the great apostle. The people crowded into a large room, and every place was taken. Did Eutychus go to hear St. Paul? You bet he did. He was right on the job. In fact, Eutychus had a very special seat, a seat where he could see and hear everything. Eutychus sat on a window sill, right up in the front of the crowded room. Eutychus wasn't going to miss anything. St. Paul began to talk. Oh, he had so many things to say, so many things to tell. Well, he talked and he talked and he talked, and the people listened to every word. It certainly was a long sermon, one of the longest sermons that the saint ever preached. But the people liked it. They came to hear about Jesus, and St. Paul didn't disappoint them. Now there wasn't much air in the room, so after some time it became very warm. There were lots of things that St. Paul said that the boy didn't understand. Eutychus became tired. He became sleepy, too. And what do you think? Eutychus fell asleep. Asleep on his special seat. Asleep on a window sill in a crowded room. St. Paul paid no attention to the sleeping boy. Neither did the people. The boy should have been home in bed. Instead, Eutychus was sound asleep on the window sill. All of a sudden there was a terrible commotion. Eutychus lost his balance. He fell out of the window and dropped 3 stories to the street below. Some of the women fainted. Some of them screamed. There was a wild rush for the door. Men and women hurried down the steps, and there on the ground they found the body of Eutychus. "He's dead! He's dead!" the women screamed. St. Paul paid no attention to the excited women. He made his way through the crowd and knelt beside the boy's body. Then Paul raised his hand and the crowd drew back. Every eye was on St. Paul. Every person wondered what the saint would do. St. Paul rubbed the boy's forehead. Then he said some prayers. What happened? Well, nothing happened right away. But in about 5 minutes Eutychus opened his eyes. He looked at the crowd and began to cry. And let me tell you something. Eutychus didn't stay around that crowd very long. No, sir. Where did he go? Eutychus went home. Children, Eutychus was the first boy who ever fell asleep in church. But he wasn't the last one. There have been lots of boys and girls, too, who have fallen asleep in church. Why, every Sunday there are boys and girls who fall asleep. Oh, I don't mean that they close their eyes, but I do mean that by their actions they show that they're asleep to what goes on at the altar. Yes, their souls go to sleep in church. How do you act in church? Do you talk and laugh? When you are at Mass, do you spend your time watching the people instead of the altar? Is your mind on some movie or game? Do you spend your time thinking about where you're going after Mass? If these things are true, then your soul is asleep. You are asleep in church with your eyes wide open. Boys and girls, you come to church to pray, to talk to God. You come to church because Jesus is here. Remember, the church is not a place where you talk to your friends. It's not a place for laughing. You don't come to church to hurt Jesus. This is God's house. This is a house of prayer. Children, when you come to church, behave yourselves. Say your prayers and keep your mind on Jesus every moment. If you do these things, your soul won't fall asleep. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Rev. Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 24. The Man Upstairs. I don't suppose that very many of you ever had a ride in an airplane. Well, it's lots of fun. I've had many rides in airplanes, and I've enjoyed every one of them. While flying in a plane is lots of fun, children, still one can't help but be afraid. When one flies high in the clouds, one is always afraid that something might go wrong. That's why all flyers put so much trust in God. This morning I want to tell you a true story about a young pilot. This pilot, or flyer, was 22 years old. Oh, he had been up in a plane many times. He had made several trips through the clouds, and he had never had an accident. One day, not so long ago, this pilot entered his plane, started the motor, and was off for a ride. He climbed up and up and up until his plane was 3,000 feet above the ground. For a time everything went well. But then suddenly something terrible happened. The plane caught on fire. 3,000 feet above the ground in a burning plane! The pilot had no parachute, so he couldn't jump. Well, what do you think he did? There was only one thing that the pilot could do. He pointed his plane toward the ground. Down, down went the plane, a blazing torch that became brighter and brighter every second. People who saw the burning plane thought that the pilot would be burned to death. But somehow he landed the plane, jumped through a window, and ran as fast as he could. A few minutes after the pilot escaped from the plane, there was a loud noise. Flames and smoke shot high into the air. The plane was destroyed, but the pilot was safe. Some time later, someone asked the pilot to tell how he managed to escape death, how he had been saved. "When that plane caught on fire," said the pilot, "I talked to the man upstairs, and I talked to him plenty. He must have heard me, because he brought me down. The man upstairs saved my life." The man upstairs. Children, you must know the man upstairs. Yes, it's God. When that pilot was a little boy, he must have learned his catechism well. Why do I say that? Well, the second lesson of the catechism teaches us that God sees and knows everything. When that pilot was in trouble, he knew that God was watching. He knew, too, that God could help him. That's why the pilot called upon God for help. That's why he prayed. And God heard those prayers, because he saved the pilot's life. It's a good thing to remember, children, that God is always watching. He sees and knows everything. He knows every time you are in danger. He knows every time you are tempted to steal, lie, disobey, cheat, eat meat on Friday, or miss Mass. God doesn't want you to get into trouble. He doesn't want you to get hurt. He doesn't want you to fall into sin. Why, then, don't you call upon God when you're in danger? When you get into trouble, you should do just what the pilot did. You should pray. Now, that doesn't mean that the only time you should pray is when you're in danger. Oh, no! You should pray even when there is no danger. The best thing to do is to pray to God every day. Through prayer you'll become one of God's best friends. Then, when you need Him, God will be right on the job to help you. Things looked very bad for the pilot in our story, but God heard his prayers. Remember, God is not far away. He is very near. God is just upstairs, waiting to help you if you pray. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of Going His Way. Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 25. The Tracks in the Snow. How would you like to live up in the northern part of Canada? During the winter there is plenty of snow up there, and it's mighty cold, too. That means that people have to spend most of the winter inside the house. You wouldn't like that, would you? Well, Elsie Meehan was a little girl who lived in the northern part of Canada. She lived there with her father, her mother, and her 2 younger brothers. Elsie was 8 years old, and she was too young to go to school. In fact, Elsie couldn't go to school because the nearest school was 8 miles away. That was too far for a little girl to walk. Now, it wasn't Elsie's fault that she had no girl friends. How could she have girl friends when the nearest house was 4 miles away? But that didn't bother little Elsie. Oh, no! Even though she didn't have girl friends, Elsie was happy. She liked to play with her younger brothers, and she loved to help her mother with the work around the house. Yes, Elsie was very happy. Last winter something very sad happened to little Elsie Meehan. It was a cold, cold night in January, 17 degrees below zero. Elsie became sick. She became very, very sick. In fact, Elsie's mother and father thought that the little girl would die. The father and mother couldn't call a doctor because there was no phone in the house. They couldn't call their neighbors because their nearest neighbors were 4 miles away. So the father and mother did the best they could. They gave Elsie medicine, kept her warm, and prayed. It was a long, long night, and every hour the little girl became weaker and weaker. Morning came. Elsie was no better. Something had to be done. Well, what do you think Elsie's father did? He left the house, and for a long time he tramped in the snow. Maybe you think he tramped in the snow looking for a doctor. Oh, no! Mr. Meehan didn't go any place. He merely tramped in the snow outside the house. You may think that that was a strange thing to do. Well, it was. I suppose that you're wondering why he tramped in the snow. Listen. First, Mr. Meehan tramped in the snow until his tracks had formed the letter H. It was a large letter, too. In fact, that letter H was several 100 feet high. Then right next to the letter H, Mr. Meehan tramped another letter in the snow. It was the letter E. Then he made the letter L, and finally the letter P. Help was written in the snow, and each letter of the word stood several 100 feet high. Then Mr. Meehan went into the house to wait, but he didn't have to wait very long. In a short time he heard a humming noise. It was the sound of an airplane motor. Yes, a plane was coming, and it looked as though the plane would fly right over Elsie's house. Well, the plane did fly over Elsie's house, and the pilot saw the word "Help" written in the snow. The pilot knew that something was wrong. Well, it didn't take very long for that pilot to land his plane. Little Elsie Meehan was carried into the plane, and the plane rushed the girl to a hospital. 5 weeks in the hospital, and Elsie was well again. Yes, children, Elsie is home now. She is well again and very happy. Elsie's life was saved by the tracks in the snow. Boys and girls, do you know that we're just like Elsie Meehan? Yes, we need help. We need God's help. We need God's help every day. Oh, we need so many things from God. We need health, happiness, help with our work and school, help in our studies. We need help to be kind, to be obedient, to be honest, to be truthful. And all this help comes from God. Now, how do we get this help from God? By prayer. Prayer is like the tracks in the snow. It's the signal that we send to God, the signal that tells God that we need help. God, you know, is always in heaven, and He sees us always. Now, when we signal to God through prayer, God knows that we want Him, and He hurries to help us. Of course, if we don't signal to God, if we don't pray, why, God lets us get along by ourselves. That's why people who don't pray don't receive help from God. If you want God to help you every day, then send a signal to Him every day. Pray every day. Send a signal to God the first thing every morning. Pray to God every morning and ask Him to help you all through the day. If something goes wrong during the day and you need God's help, send Him another signal. Say a prayer, and He will hurry to help you. Send another signal to God before you go to sleep at night. Pray and ask God to watch over you while you sleep. Learn to pray to God often. Send Him a signal often. Pray. Remember, children, God sees every signal. God hears every prayer. Best of all, God answers every prayer. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 26. The Boy Who Bothered God. Would you like to hear a true story this morning? Well, I thought you would. True stories, you know, are always the best stories, and that's why I like to tell them. Now, I'm not going to tell you the real name of the boy in this story, so we're going to call the boy Teddy. Teddy was 6 years old, and he was in the first grade at St. Mary's School. At the close of school, the boys and girls of the first grade put on a play for their parents and friends. It was a dandy play, and one of the best actors in the play was Teddy. Of course, Teddy was only a little fellow, but he didn't make any mistakes. He surprised everybody. When the play was over, some of the priests went over to the school to see the children who were in the play. Yes, the priests went to the first grade, and they made a big fuss over all the children. Finally, one of the priests called Teddy up to the front of the room. All of the priests shook Teddy's hand, and they told him that he had done very well. Of course, that made Teddy very happy. Then one of the priests asked Teddy a question. "Teddy, when you grow up, what are you going to be?" The little boy looked up at the priest. "Father," he said, "when I grow up, I'd like to be a priest." "So you'd like to be a priest?" smiled the old man. "Well, Teddy, if you want to be a priest, you'll have to pray hard." Teddy nodded his head and walked back to his seat. The next day there was no school. When the sisters went to the church in the morning, they found little Teddy kneeling in the first bench. Teddy stayed there for the Mass, and all during the Mass he kept his eyes on the altar. When the Mass was over, Teddy arose and left the church. In the yard the boy met one of the sisters. "Teddy," asked the sister, "what were you doing in church so early this morning?" "I was praying," answered the little boy. "Last night I told Father that I wanted to be a priest, and Father said if I want to be a priest I'll have to pray hard." Now Teddy didn't stop praying then and there. Oh, no! That morning at Mass was only the beginning of Teddy's prayers. For years and years Teddy bothered God every day, telling God that he wanted to be a priest. All through his years at St. Mary's School, Teddy prayed for one thing, that God would help him to become a priest. Yes, Teddy bothered God a lot with his asking, but God liked to be bothered. The more Teddy bothered God with his asking, the more God was certain that Teddy really wanted to be a priest. Children, Teddy has been bothering God for a good many years. And what do you think? Within a few months, Teddy's friends will stop calling him Teddy. In a short time, Teddy's friends will call him Father. Yes, children, next June Teddy will be a priest. So you can see, children, that it pays to bother God. It pays to keep on asking and asking and asking. If you really want something from God, show God that you really want it by asking for it more than once. Keep on asking. Keep on bothering God. Keep on praying. Many, many times I've met boys who wanted to be doctors or lawyers or dentists. I've met girls, too, who wanted to be nuns or nurses or teachers. And what happened? Those boys and girls grew up and they never became what they wanted to be. Why? Because they didn't bother God. They didn't pray enough. They didn't keep on with their prayers. Don't ever get the idea that God gets tired listening to your prayers. God loves to have you bother Him. Every time you bother God, you show God that you need Him. And that's just what God wants. You do need God. Yes, you need God every day. You need God to help you in everything you do. Well, God won't help you unless you ask for His help. God won't help you unless you pray. Children, take a tip from Teddy. When you want something from God, bother God, and bother God a lot. Pray. End of chapter 26. Chapter 27 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 27. The Ship That Ran Away. Would you like to hear about the ship that ran away? Well, that's my story for you today. One bright summer morning, many years ago, a fishing vessel, the North Star, set out from Newfoundland. The ship carried 3 men who were sailors as well as fishermen. The men decided that each one would take his turn steering and guiding the ship while the other 2 men fished. The sea was calm and the breeze was good as the North Star sailed peacefully through the blue water of the great Atlantic. At late afternoon the North Star was far from shore. In fact, the 3 men couldn't see land. The fishing was good and the men were having a fine time. But then something terrible happened. The sky darkened and the sea became very rough. A mighty wind howled across the great ocean. Huge waves pounded the sides of the North Star, and the ship rolled and tossed as if it were only a toy. Then the heavens opened and rain fell in torrents. Oh, a storm at sea is a terrible thing, and the storm that late afternoon was one of the worst that the Atlantic had ever seen. For more than an hour the men on the North Star felt that every moment would be their last. They were tired, weary, afraid. Yet they didn't give up hope. The North Star had been through other storms. Perhaps the North Star would pull through this one. Suddenly a huge wave struck the side of the ship. The North Star shook and tossed from side to side, and water dashed up over the deck. The 3 men were knocked down and carried along in the rushing water. Before they knew what happened, all 3 men were washed off the deck of the ship and were tossed about in the ocean. Yes, the men were swimmers, but the waves were so high that they couldn't swim. They fought hard, but luck was against them. Not one of the 3 men made the ship. They were all drowned. They lost their lives in the mighty waters of the deep Atlantic. Now that's not the end of the story. The storm raged for 3 more hours. Then, gradually, the wind lowered. The sea became calm and peaceful. The storm was over. Children, I know that you'd like to ask a question. You'd like to know what happened to the North Star. You'd like to know whether the ship sunk. Well, the North Star did not sink. All through the terrible storm the ship managed to keep afloat, and after the storm was over she was still riding the water. Then what do you think happened? The North Star began to move. The ship began to drift. For weeks and weeks the North Star sailed the ocean. A ship sailing the ocean. A ship without a captain. A ship without a crew. Of course, during all those weeks other ships passed the North Star, but the sailors on those other ships didn't know that no one was steering the North Star. Nobody knew that the North Star had no captain. Nobody knew that the ship was running away. Now, you'd like to know whether the North Star ever reached shore. Yes, the North Star did reach shore, but not the shore of Newfoundland. The North Star was carried by the tide until she hit upon some rocks near the city of Boston. A young fisherman found her early one morning. There was a hole in the side of the ship, and water was pouring into the hole. She was a sad sight. The ship wrecked upon the rocks, because there was no one to guide her, this ship that had run away. Children, let's think of your soul as a ship. Your soul is on a journey to heaven. Like the ship, your soul must be steered and guided on its journey through life. Without a guide, your soul would be shipwrecked. Your soul must not be shipwrecked. Your soul must go through the storms of life safely. Your soul must not be lost. Now, God has given you a guide to steer your soul safely to heaven. We call that guide by the name of conscience. Your conscience, you know, is that voice inside you that tells you that certain things are good and that other things are bad. When the devil tries to get you to steal, your conscience tells you not to steal. When you're tempted to eat meat on Friday, your conscience tells you that eating meat on Friday is wrong. It's your conscience that tells you to keep away from bad companions. It tells you not to look at bad pictures, not to read bad books, or listen to bad stories. And, when you do sin, it's your conscience that bothers you and keeps telling you that you've done wrong. Then, too, your conscience points out good things to you. Every time you go to Mass, speak the truth, every time you are honest, and when you obey, it's your conscience that makes you happy. In other words, your conscience tells you what is right and what is wrong. I know that you want to save your soul. You don't want to shipwreck your soul on the rocks of sin. Well, then, listen and obey your conscience. Your conscience will guide and steer you safely. Remember, your conscience is the voice of God. Will God lead you astray? No. End of chapter 27. Chapter 28 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 28. The Golden Ball. Before I tell you my story this morning, I must tell you about a famous spring in Persia. The Silver Spring. That's what the people call it, the Silver Spring. Well, in order to get to the Silver Spring, the people of Persia had to walk over a very long road. At the end of the road was the ivory castle, and at the side of the castle was the famous Silver Spring. The people, you know, felt that the water from the Silver Spring had great power. They felt that, if they drank from the Silver Spring, they would never get sick, they would never grow old, they would never die. That's why everyone wanted to drink the water from the famous Silver Spring. Now, it was a long journey to the ivory castle and the Silver Spring. Oh, lots of people tried to make the journey, but most of them became tired and couldn't finish. Yes, many people tried, but very few people ever reached the Silver Spring. But there was one man in Persia who did reach the Silver Spring. That man was Baru. He drank the water from the Silver Spring and was very happy. After drinking the water, Baru felt that he'd never be sick again. He felt that he'd never grow old. He felt, too, that he'd never die. Why, Baru was so happy that he decided to spend all his time helping others to reach the Silver Spring. Now, what do you think Baru did? Well, he did just this. Baru used to hide along the side of the road that led to the ivory castle and the Silver Spring. From his hiding place, Baru could see every person who traveled along the road, but no one could see Baru. Whenever a person became tired and was tempted to turn back, Baru would throw a small golden ball along the road that led to the Silver Spring. The golden ball, rolling toward the Silver Spring, would make people forget that they were tired. People would chase the golden ball, and in a short time they'd find themselves at the ivory castle. Yes, the golden ball thrown by Baru led many a tired person to the famous Silver Spring. Boys and girls, that's a good story. It's a good story because it reminds us that we, too, have a golden ball that we can throw before the tired feet of other boys and girls. Our golden ball is good example. You know, children, we are all traveling along a hard road. It's the road that leads to heaven. Every person in this world is traveling along that road. And what happens? Why, very often some boys and girls get tired as they travel the road to heaven. They get tired of being good. They get tired of doing good. Instead of working hard to get to the end of the road, those boys and girls want to turn back. They'd rather travel the easy road that leads to sin. Now, there's where you come into the picture. If you throw the golden ball of your good example in front of those boys and girls, they'll chase the golden ball, and someday they'll reach heaven. What is one of the main reasons why you say your prayers every morning and night? Because your mother and father have said those prayers with you and have given you good example. Why do you go to Mass every Sunday? Because your parents have shown you good example. Why do you receive Holy Communion often? Because your mother and father receive Holy Communion often. Why are you honest? Why do you tell the truth? Why do you do anything that's good? You do all these things because your parents have shown you how to do them. For years your father and mother have thrown before you the golden ball of good example. Why, then, don't you do the same thing? Why don't you toss the golden ball of good example before other boys and girls? Remember, some boys and girls find it hard to be good. They find it hard to be honest. They find it hard to be truthful. They find it hard to go to Mass. They find it hard to go to confession. But when those boys and girls see you doing these things, they, too, will want to do them. Your good example will be the golden ball that others will follow. Your good example will be the golden ball that will lead others to do good. Perhaps you have some friend whom you admire. Well, you like to do whatever your friend does, isn't it right? Yes, you like to imitate your friend. You feel whatever your friend does is just right. You follow your friend's example. Well, don't forget, others may be following you. Be sure, at all times, you show good example. Just think of the fun you can have by tossing the golden ball of good example before other boys and girls. It will make you very, very happy. It will make you happy to know that your golden ball of good example is leading others to God's ivory castle, Heaven. End of chapter 28. Chapter 29 of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 29. The Way of a Saint. John Peters and Tom Crowley were very good friends. These men had been friends for over 30 years. But one day John Peters lost his best friend. Yes, Tom Crowley died. After the death of his friend, John was very lonesome. But John Peters didn't forget his friend. Oh, no. Every day he prayed for the soul of his friend, and once a week John went to the cemetery to visit Tom's grave. On one of these visits to the cemetery, John was surprised to find that a tombstone had been placed over the grave of his friend. Now there was something strange about that tombstone. There was no writing upon the tombstone. No writing upon the tombstone! That made John wonder. He looked at the tombstone for a long time, and tears ran down his cheeks. Then John Peters knelt down to pray. When John finished his prayers, he arose and lifted his head. And was John surprised? What do you think? There, standing next to the tombstone, was a real, live angel. John shook from head to foot. Why, he was so afraid that he couldn't speak. "I have been sent," spoke the angel kindly, "to write something upon this tombstone. I didn't know Tom Crowley, so I don't know what to write about him. Perhaps you can tell me something about your friend. Then I'll know what to write." "Tom Crowley was my best friend, and I knew him very well," said John slowly. "He tried to be good, but, every so often, he failed. But no matter how many times he sinned, Tom Crowley always came back and tried again to live right." "That's enough," said the angel, and he raised his hand. Then the angel turned and began to write upon the tombstone. What did the angel write? The angel wrote 4 words, and the 4 words were these: "Here lies a saint." Yes, children, at times Tom Crowley was a sinner. But Tom never remained a sinner. It didn't take him very long to beg forgiveness from God. And then he'd begin again to live right. That's how Tom Crowley, the sinner, became Tom Crowley, the saint. Now, children, I know that each one of you wants to become a saint. I know, too, that there will be times during your life when you may fall into sin. If you ever do fall into sin, then do just what Tom Crowley did. Beg God to forgive you and begin again to live right. Oh, I know that some people fall into sin and they remain in sin. Those people are making terrible mistakes. If those people die in sin, they'll go to hell. They'll lose their souls. Those people refuse to let God help them. Those people are stubborn. They don't want to be saved. But you want to be saved. Of course you do. Well, Jesus has made it easy for you to be saved. Jesus made the sacrament of penance for sinners, to help sinners to get back to God, to help sinners to begin again to live right. Do you know what Jesus once said? Jesus said that you have to fight for heaven. Anyone who quits in the middle of a fight never wins. If you quit fighting for heaven, you'll never win heaven. If you quit fighting for heaven, you'll lose, and you'll lose badly. So, children, don't ever give up trying to save your soul. Keep on keeping on. If you ever fall into sin, then go to confession and start trying again. If you do that, children, then some day, perhaps, An angel will write upon your tombstone, 'Here lies a saint.'" End of chapter 29. Chapter 30 of Going His Way. Little Talks to Little Folks by Rev. Gerald T. Brennan. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Chapter 30. The Cat That Couldn't Count. Buttons was a large gray cat. A cat without a home. At one time Buttons had lived in a firehouse, but he didn't live there very long. Of course, the firemen were very kind to him, but Buttons didn't like living in a firehouse. There was too much noise, too many bells, bells that rang in the night so that he couldn't sleep. Buttons wanted to get away from the firehouse. He wanted to be free. He wanted to see the world. So one day Buttons disappeared. Buttons ran away. He ran away from home. At first Buttons liked the idea of being free. He could go wherever he pleased. He could do what he wished. But it wasn't very long before Buttons found out that it wasn't so nice to be without a home. He found out very soon that people weren't too anxious to feed him. There was many a day when he was hungry and had nothing to eat. There were nights, too, when it rained, nights when it was very cold. There were many a time when Buttons wished that he were back at the firehouse, but the cat was proud, too proud to go back. One day, not so long ago, Buttons wasn't feeling very well, so he went into a lady's yard and fell asleep under a large tree. And what do you think? While Buttons was sleeping, a bad boy threw a large stone and hit the sleeping cat. Well, that stone hurt plenty. Poor Buttons! Oh, how his back hurt when he tried to walk. Yes, and his foot hurt too. Buttons was in terrible pain, in so much pain that he began to cry. Just then along came another cat. He was a stranger to Buttons, but he was very kind. "What's the matter?" asked the stranger. "Oh, a bad boy hit me with a stone," cried Buttons, "and he hurt me." "You'll be all right in a little while," said the stranger kindly. "Take it easy and don't worry." Take it easy and don't worry. Buttons didn't like to hear those words. "Listen, chum," said Buttons to the stranger. "I can't take it easy, and I can't help but worry. Somewhere along the line I lost a life." "You lost a life?" asked the stranger in surprise. "What do you mean?" Buttons felt that he had met a friend. "Lie down," he said, "and I'll tell you my story." The stranger drew near to Buttons and he lay beside him. He opened his ears wide. The stranger was ready to hear Buttons tell his story. "People say," began Buttons, "that every cat has 9 lives. Every cat lives 9 times." The stranger nodded his head. Yes, he, too, had heard that every cat has 9 lives. "One day when I was a kitten," said Buttons, "a lady tied a piece of ribbon around my neck. I didn't like the idea, but I had to wear it. Well, I met a police dog, and that dog called me a sissy. That was too much. I became angry, and I talked back to that police dog. What happened? Why, in no time that dog chewed me into bits. He killed me, and I lost my first life." The strange cat shivered. Now he knew why he didn't like police dogs. "That's not all," said Buttons again. "My next life was spent on a ship, riding the sea. It was a hard life, a dangerous life. One night we got caught in a terrible storm. For 6 hours we fought hard, but finally the ship went down. 87 men and myself were drowned in that angry sea. That was the end of my second life." The strange cat's eyes almost popped out of its head. He wondered what Buttons would say next. Buttons was silent for some time. He seemed to be thinking. "Oh, yes," he said finally, "I must tell you some more. You know, all cats are curious. Well, one time I was walking through a field and I came across a trap. I knew it was a trap, but I was curious. I wanted to see how the trap would work. I touched the trap and something snapped. I was caught around the neck and I couldn't breathe. Yes, the trap choked me to death, and that was the end of another life. Curiosity had killed another cat. Suddenly Buttons began to cry again. He cried and cried as though his heart would break. Finally he stood up. He looked straight into the eyes of his new friend. "Oh, I'm all upset and I'm worried," said Buttons. "I started with 9 lives, but I've been careless and I've lost count of them. Now I don't know whether I'm living my 8th life or my 9th one." The strange cat nodded his head. He agreed that Buttons had a real worry. Was Buttons living his 8th life or his 9th one? Perhaps this was Buttons' last chance. Buttons couldn't afford to be careless. Well, children, like Buttons, you can't afford to be careless. This is your last chance to save your soul. You won't have 9 lives to live. You have only one. You have only one chance to save your soul. You must save your soul now. You know what you have to do in order to save your soul. You must pray, go to Mass, go to confession, receive Holy Communion. You must keep God's laws. But when are you going to do these things? Don't get the idea that you can do all these things just before you die. You may not have a chance to do these things just before you die. Don't take any chances. Say those prayers now. Go to Mass and confession now. Receive those Holy Communions now. Keep God's laws now. Every single day you should work to save your soul. Children, God gives everybody one chance to save his soul. This is your chance. Don't be careless. Save your soul now. End of chapter 30. End of Going His Way, Little Talks to Little Folks by Reverend Gerald T. Brennan.